Chapter 121. Falling into Darkness. After smiling and bidding farewell to Hela, Sophia closed the door, and the smile on her face quickly disappeared. She took off her shoes, walked to the sofa in the living room, hugged the doll on the sofa, and lay on the sofa sideways. Sophia buried her head in the doll and whispered, "Mother." Sophia did not remember what her mother really looked like. In fact, in the first year of living in the Black Domain, Sophia knew nothing. Except for some common sense in daily life, she knew nothing. Therefore, she thought she might be an abandoned orphan. It was not until the second year that the talent in Sophia's blood awakened. She not only awakened the silver blood of the silver family, but also perfectly inherited the talent of the control system from her mother, and even stronger. It was also because of the awakening of the talent that Sophia broke through the seal set by her mother in her head and recalled everything again. However, although she had recovered her memory, her mother was a 5-ring enchantment spellcaster after all. Even if Sophia's talent was awakened, it would be impossible for her to completely remove her mother's seal. Therefore, Sophia could only recover part of her memory. Sophia turned over, hugged the doll, and looked at the ceiling. She could not hide the situation of her memory recovery from Hess. As the teacher of Sophia's mother, Hess checked Sophia's physical condition, confirmed that there was no hidden danger, and listened to Sophia's crying calmly. Finally, Hess gave her 2 choices. First, obey the fate arranged by her mother. Hess would reseal Sophia's memory and her talent together. Sophia would spend a stable and happy life under his protection. Second, reject her mother's arrangement, become a spellcaster, and embark on a thorny road destined to be full of suffering in order to save her mother. However, this also means that the stability brought by her mother's compromise will disappear, and the former enemy will once again target Sophia. Sophia naturally chose the second one. In the dark living room, Sophia shed a tear, then she sat up, put the worn-out doll aside, cast a spell of forced calmness on herself, and opened her calm and rational eyes. Sophia held her left fist with her right hand and placed it on her chest, silently adjusting the balance of positive and negative energy in her body. After simply adjusting the balance, she walked to the corner of the living room with an expressionless face. She dragged out 2 boxes from the corner and unsealed all the heavy seals on one of the boxes. After opening the seal, Sophia took out a bottle of alchemy potion from the box. She casually lifted the box aside, took the potion, another box, and the book of wisdom on the sofa, and walked into the practice room. After entering the practice room, Sophia turned on the lights in the room to the maximum. The dazzling white light was reflected on her expressionless face. She walked to the center of the practice room, put the things on the ground, and opened the box. Looking at the box, she had been saving all these years and slowly accumulating all her belongings. The equally stingy Sophia poured out all her belongings without hesitation. She used these materials to carefully set up the practice room. After spending an unknown amount of time, Sophia finished the arrangement. Finally, she sat in the center of the practice room, picked up the book of wisdom and opened it. She used the same tone as before to send a private message to Hela that she had some insights and would meditate for a while. Then, she sent a private message to another person. Finally, Sophia closed the book of wisdom and put it aside. She picked up the alchemy potion, opened it and drank it, and she also activated the magic circle around her. Countless elements and energy emerged from the ground and quickly filled the entire room. Among them, the negative energy visible to the naked eye occupied the absolute majority. And countless negative emotions quickly surged into Sophia's mind. Sophia closed her eyes and, under the effect of the potion, she forced herself into a deep meditation state. In such a simple and unprotected environment, she began to advance to the 4th ring. On the other side, Hela was lying on the bed. After noticing the prompt from the Book of Wisdom, she slowly picked up the magic book. After taking a look at Sophia's post, Hela, who didn't notice anything wrong, simply replied and closed the magic book again. It's just an ordinary meditation in seclusion, nothing unusual. Moreover, according to Hela's observation just now, the positive and negative energies in Sophia's body have been balanced, and her emotions are very stable. There is nothing to worry about. Thinking of this, Hela yawned and closed her eyes. However, what Hela didn't expect was that Sophia, as a spellcaster who specializes in negative energy enchantment spells, would really not realize the true attitude of the spellcasters in the Black Domain towards her. As an enchantment spellcaster known for playing with the mind and soul, after so many years, did she really not realize anything? Sophia might not realize this, but it is absolutely impossible for the enchanted spellcaster not to realize this. Moreover, if Sophia was really as innocent and kind as she was when she was with Hela, could she really live a stable life until now? Even if the Truth Council doesn't take her seriously, can a pure and kind low-level spellcaster really survive the Truth Council's targeting until now? Although Heis guaranteed Sophia's life, he could only guarantee her safety in the Black Domain. Moreover, Sophia often left the Black Domain and was out of Heis's protection. For so many years, has no one tried to assassinate her? How did she survive countless malicious attacks? Is Sophia, who can live alone until now, really the ignorant girl that Hela imagined? Is the Sophia that Hela knows really the real Sophia? Or is she just pretending? The person who made Sophia believe that everyone was hostile to her was the enemy sent by the Council of Truth? Or was it herself? Hela's experience is still too short. She met Roland when she was in the most painful time, and it didn't take long for her to complete her revenge. Moreover, she was pulled back by Roland before the negative energy was completely unbalanced. Moreover, Hela is a necromancer, and the influence of negative energy on emotions is not as strong and sensitive as that of a necromancer. Hela has not experienced long and hopeless despair, nor has she tried to be shrouded by endless negative emotions. Perhaps, Hela, who had fought her way out of the chicken-eating contest in the undead plane, could understand this feeling, but Hela now couldn't. She thought she could understand Sophia, and she could pull Sophia out of the darkness just like Roland pulled her out of the darkness, but, as it turned out, she couldn't. Chapter 122. Although Griat came with great fanfare and left in disgrace, the news once occupied the hot topic of the Soul School. However, because Griat fled decisively, he left the Black Domain immediately on the day he admitted defeat, and even traveled all the way, and he was out of the control area of the Soul School in a few days. And the other protagonist of the topic, Hela. After the duel, she was rarely active in public places. Therefore, after a few days, the hot topic died down again because there was no new content. The Black Domain once again returned to its previous days. However, although the Black Domain has returned to calm on the surface, the living room of Sophia's residence is more lively than ever. In Sophia's residence, in a narrow room, Roland, Hela, and Hess gathered in the living room. Hela sat on the sofa, obviously a little restless, and looked towards the meditation room from time to time. Beside her, Roland and Hess, who were also sitting on the sofa, were obviously much calmer. Although Hela didn't notice that Sophia was wrong, if Roland hadn't brought her to Sophia's room, Hela would probably have thought that Sophia was just meditating in seclusion. Hela never thought that Sophia would choose to break through the fourth ring in her own home. It was obviously in the Tower of Truth, where there was a place specifically for breakthroughs. Why did she take such a risk? Is it really possible to succeed under such harsh conditions? Thinking back to the difficulties she encountered when she broke through, Hela became more and more uneasy. Don't panic, I'm prepared, Sophia won't die. Hess, who was standing aside, looked at Hela, who was fidgeting, and took the initiative to speak comfortingly. We're here, there will be no problem. Roland also added. Yet. Hela nodded helplessly, suppressed her uneasiness, and sat on the sofa obediently. Although Sophia's success or failure in the breakthrough had nothing to do with Hela, as Hela's first friend in the Tower of Truth, Hela still hoped that Sophia would have a good result. However, among the three, only Hela was more nervous. Roland and Hess felt that there was no big problem. After all, both of them were knowledgeable, mature, and reliable adults. After comforting Hela, Roland also looked at Hess, pointed to the magic circle in the meditation room, and asked casually. By the way, did you arrange those? No, Sophia studied and arranged them by herself. Hess shook his head and said with some sigh. I just provided some information. I didn't expect that she really did it by herself. Good talent. Roland looked at the complex magic circle and said with praise. Although the magic circle Sophia prepared for herself was a bit messy and simple, it was already very powerful as it could be operated and had an effect. In terms of magic circle arrangement, Sophia's talent was much stronger than Hela's. With the rich extraordinary materials provided by the ruins, Hela could practice frequently, but even so, Hela could only arrange some simple magic circles now. Hela had never succeeded in practicing the complex magic circle like the one in front of her. And Sophia, given her situation, probably hadn't even practiced a few times. Heis took over Roland's words and sighed. This child's talent is better than her mother's, and she is more independent than her mother. This is the path she chose herself. using the spell of enchantment to distort her mind, forcing herself to believe that everyone is hostile and malicious to herself, so as to exploit herself and produce and accumulate enough negative energy. This is really a surprising choice. However, the negative energy produced by oneself is indeed the best nutrient. Roland pointed out the source of the overwhelming majority of negative energy in the meditation room, and said with a slightly surprised tone. Roland had only seen this kind of operation on players in his previous life. However, this way of playing is also a kind of unorthodox way of playing that is not easy to use for players. First of all, in the auxiliary function state of the game, the player's emotions cannot affect the player's character, so the player's character will not generate any positive or negative energy by default. If you want to play this kind of unorthodox flow, you can only turn off all the auxiliary functions of the game and turn on unlimited free casting. In this way, the player's emotions will affect the character. However, free casting is not something that ordinary players can grasp. Although under the condition of free casting, the player is not bound by the game function, but this also means that everything needs to be controlled by the players themselves. If you want to use this evil method to get promoted, the player must find a way to keep his emotions negative and low for a long time before the promotion. Any positive emotions may lead to the complete bankruptcy of the promotion plan. This kind of gameplay is quite abnormal even in the player group, and not all players can play it this way. Of course, free casting is not only effective in this way, it also completely changes the player's gaming experience. When there is an auxiliary function, the player only needs to click on the skill to release the skill. Unless it is countered by the spell, it will not fail. It is stable and reliable. When free casting, it depends on the player to build the model and cast the spell by himself like a superhuman. However, there are many benefits to free casting. Players can adjust the consumption and strength of skills by themselves. Moreover, there is no limit on skill slots. You can use as many spells as you know, and there is no CD. As long as you have enough magic power, you can cast spells as you want. There is such a saying in the player community. Only players who have learned free casting can be considered as real high-end players. And in the mage player community, there is another saying. Only mages who can cast spells stably in the free casting state are real mages. Because only mages in the free casting state can have enough explosive power to truly destroy the balance. Of course, even if you can cast spells freely, unless you fight bosses or PK, you will choose auxiliary functions, or switch between auxiliary and free to be lazy. How tiring it is to keep free casting on. Only professional players like Roland will keep free casting on. Because, in order to pursue visual effects, professional competitions are mandatory to turn on free casting. This mechanism of destroying balance is also the characteristic technology of fantasy technology, the developer of Millennium War. All its games basically have similar mechanisms. Although this means that the gap between high-end players and ordinary players has widened a lot, he is the only one that provides fully immersive virtual games, and he is also an official company of the People's Union. He doesn't care about profits at all, and he doesn't have any survival pressure. Therefore, he doesn't care about the players' ideas at all. There is an exam tomorrow night, so I may postpone it for a day. Please be informed. Chapter 123. Using the enchantment spell to twist and cut her mind, she built a cocoon to restrain herself. Then, she modified her own memory and divided the cut mind into two halves, one floating on the surface and the other sinking into the dark. Using the pure and kind side as the surface mind, she faced the cocoon she built, which was full of malice, and used it as a catalyst to speed up the output of negative energy. Using the chaotic and evil side as the deep mind and storage, she absorbed negative energy and continued to grow. This is the fundamental reason why Sophia was able to quickly become a three-ring spell caster. However, the hidden dangers of this method are also quite huge. In the case of absorbing only negative energy, Sophia's surface mind not only did not grow, but also, due to the persecution of the cocoon, her surface mind even weakened. However, the deep mind absorbed a lot of negative energy and was able to grow and expand rapidly. Therefore, for Sophia at present, her absorption of negative energy represents the chaotic and evil side, which is far stronger than her disguised, pure and kind side. This means that once Sophia ends this mental split and reconnects the upper mind, the deep mind with a huge advantage may easily cover the surface mind, making Sophia a thorough villain, the murderous princess of conviction in Roland's previous life. However, Hela's arrival and active closeness interrupted Sophia's plan. According to the arrangement of the meditation room, Sophia intends to abandon the surface mind, take the deep mind as the main body, and use extreme negative energy to forcibly complete the promotion of the fourth ring. However, Hela made friends with her surface mind and took the initiative to teach Sophia the knowledge of positive energy. The balance of positive and negative energy in the body means that Sophia's plan to break through with extreme negative energy has a loophole. In order to avoid too much contact with Hela, which caused the plan to fail completely, Sophia's deep mind resurfaced, carrying the negative energy accumulated for several years, and started the promotion of the fourth ring in advance. Roland sat on the sofa, casually looked at Hesse beside him, and said, "I think if she just wanted to rescue her mother, she didn't need to take such a risk. I think, compared to a new, dispensable fourth ring spellcaster, maybe a new seventh ring spellcaster is the real solution. What do you think?" Looking at Roland, who didn't care, Hesse smiled bitterly and responded, "Indeed." He was silent for a while, and said to Roland pleadingly, "Please show mercy." Roland nodded slightly, smiled, and said, "Please rest assured, she won't have any big problems." After speaking, Roland looked at Hela beside him and asked, "Hela, do you have any ideas?" Hela showed a puzzled expression on her face, and looked at Roland hesitantly. "What do you think will be the result of Sophia's promotion?" Roland smiled, without any riddles, and gave Hela several options. "What kind of Sophia do you like?" "She failed to be promoted and is exactly the same as before. She is simple and kind when her surface mind swallows up her deep mind. She is chaotic and evil when her deep mind swallows up her surface mind. Or is she the one whose surface and deep mind are reunited and whose normal mind is restored? Which one do you like? I can satisfy you." Hela was stunned. Although as she learned more and more, she also knew Roland's extraordinary peculiarities. But she really didn't expect that Roland could actually influence or even decide the result of Sophia's promotion. Listening to the choice given by Roland, Hela hesitated and said hesitantly, "Which one is the real her? All of them are basically the same, except that their personalities will be different after promotion. However, if you want the real Sophia you mentioned, although it is a bit troublesome, it is not impossible." Roland thought about it and continued, "But if that's the case, I can't guarantee Sophia's opinion of you. The surface mind and the deep mind are both part of Sophia after all. No matter who wins or loses, or whether they are tied and reintegrated, it will only affect Sophia's future personality, whether it is good or evil, or relatively neutral. In essence, Sophia is still Sophia. And Hela's request is that Sophia's personality should not change, which is relatively troublesome. Roland needs to find a way to balance the strength of Sophia's surface and deep mind, and then reintegrate to reduce the impact on her personality." Hearing Roland's answer, Hela was obviously a little entangled. After hesitating for a while, she looked at the silent Hesse on the side. As Sophia's current guardian, perhaps it is more suitable for him to make such a decision? After being looked at by Hela, the silent Hesse also gave his own advice. "If possible, let her return to her original appearance." Hearing Hesse's words, Hela looked at Roland again. "Decided?" Roland raised his eyebrows slightly and stood up from the sofa. "Yet?" Hela nodded. "Okay, wait for my good news." After saying this, Roland walked towards the meditation room. Under the surprised gaze of Hesse and the curious gaze of Hela, Roland's body gradually became ethereal, and he directly ignored all the magic arrays, elements, and energy and walked into the meditation room. Where Hesse couldn't see, Grey Crow was being held in Roland's right hand with a helpless look on his face. Its virtual talent was forcibly borrowed by Roland. In the virtual state, Roland quickly walked in front of Sophia. Looking at Sophia, who was already dominated by the deep mind, Roland stretched out his right hand and injected magic into the ring on his right finger. Roland dared to guarantee that it was naturally because of this ring, the crown of domination that he snatched from the Lich King. Although the crown of domination was not complete and did not restore much energy, as a legendary equipment, even if it was just a fragment, the crown of domination could be played within Roland's hands. Roland extracted a small part of the blessing stored in the space bracelet and the High Priest's staff, and then injected it into the crown of domination to provide energy for his next micro-manipulation. Then, Roland pointed his right index finger on Sophia's forehead and began micro-manipulation. Negative energy is exactly what the crown of domination is good at. Roland only needs to extract most of the negative energy stored in the deep mind, so that the surface mind can resist again and not be killed by the deep mind accidentally. Then, use the crown of domination as a filter to slowly convert the stored negative energy into pure energy, distribute it to the surface and deep minds according to the battle situation, and guide Sophia to take the initiative to bridge the mind. As for Sophia's original plan, Roland doesn't care. Sophia had better follow Roland's guidance honestly, otherwise, Roland doesn't mind threatening her directly. For example, you don't want your plan to be known by the Truth Council, right? Or, you don't want anything to happen to Hess or your mother, right? Of course, if even threats don't work, Roland still has the final means. Relying on the power of the crown of domination, he will ignore her wishes and forcibly sew her mind together like a ghost. Anyway, the worst result is that Sophia will be a fool for a year or two. Chapter 124. Although Roland had prepared for the worst, things still went smoothly. After a simple filtering to restore Sophia's two halves of the mind to reason and threatening twice, Sophia's two halves of the mind obediently accepted Roland's guidance. After all, her surface mind, which should have lost all hope and did not resist in her carefully woven cocoon, was unexpectedly tenacious and unwilling to give up the last glimmer of hope. Even if it was driven into a small corner by the deep mind, it still emitted a faint light and resisted the deep mind. The variables brought by Hela still destroyed Sophia's plan. She brought a glimmer of hope to Sophia's surface mind, and this change also caused a serious mistake in Sophia's promotion. The surface mind did not melt as quickly as she planned, but was constantly resisting and wearing away the power of the deep mind. The weakening of the accumulated power also meant that Sophia had less power to use for soul sublimation. Therefore, before Roland intervened, Sophia had already realized that something was wrong. If she continued to be deadlocked, she might fail. Especially as time went by, the hidden danger of the split mind was exposed. Her split mind began to fight each other, neither willing to give up and help the other side. Originally, according to the plan, the deep mind would devour the surface mind at the moment of promotion and quickly solve this hidden danger, but the unexpected resistance of the surface mind still delayed the hidden danger to erupt. It was also because of this that after Roland intervened, Sophia's surface mind quickly accepted Roland's guidance and began to absorb Roland's filtered energy, and became stronger again, while the deep mind that had the upper hand naturally resisted Roland's guidance. But Roland didn't care. While extracting the negative energy of the deep mind, he also leaked a trace of the high-level breath of the crown of domination to scare the deep mind. Although the chaotic and crazy deep mind didn't care about Roland's threat at all, after Roland used the crown of domination to filter the negative energy in its body and removed the messy emotions and thoughts, the deep mind that regained some rationality finally recognized the situation. Since it was impossible to kill the shallow mind and become Sophia's only mind, then after being killed by Roland and re-merging with the shallow mind, then fusion is not impossible. As for the shallow mind, the simple and kind shallow mind said that she had no objection. Therefore, under the influence of the crown of domination, Sophia's shallow mind and deep mind were successfully reunited. Although they have been separated for several years, after all, they were one before, and with the assistance of the crown of domination and Roland's micro-manipulation, there was no accident in the fusion. At the same time, after completing the fusion, Sophia did not communicate with Roland, and did not care that the mind was not stable after the fusion. She directly gathered all her strength and forcibly began the sublimation of the soul. In this regard, Roland could only bring the crown of domination to provide her with energy for promotion and be prepared to save her life if she failed. Outside the living room, when Hela looked at the meditation room for the 100th time, suddenly, the concentration of elements and energy in the meditation room dropped rapidly, and correspondingly, the breath of the life forms in the meditation room rose rapidly. Before Hela could react, Hess, who had always been calm and composed, stood up immediately and ran towards the meditation room. His actual actions showed that he was not as calm as he seemed on the surface, and he was still very concerned about Sophia. After Hess passed by like a gust of wind, Hela also reacted and hurriedly followed. Hess pushed open the meditation room and saw Sophia in the center. She was frantically absorbing the surrounding elements and energy for the energy needed for soul sublimation and body evolution. Almost without hesitation, Hess immediately took out some high-concentration dark element crystals from the space ring and smashed them directly on the ground. Countless dark elements replenished the element concentration in the meditation room. Behind Hess, Hela's eyes followed Sophia's side and turned to the nearby open space, and then Roland's figure reappeared. In Hela's vision, Roland let go of the hand holding the grey crow, and the grey crow with a look of despair also flapped its wings and flew behind her at the fastest speed, squatting behind her. Hela patted the grey crow's head and secretly took out some snacks prepared for the grey crow from the space bracelet. The grey crow swallowed the snacks Hela took out in one gulp, and then it shrank its head and stayed behind Hela obediently. This was the first time it was so well behaved. The grey crow was usually very active and rarely stayed by Hela's side honestly. Basically, it would fly around in a radius of more than 10 meters with Hela as the center. It seems that the grey crow has been much more honest in the past few months of being carried by Roland. Hess, who focused on Roland, did not realize Hela's little action. After Roland reappeared, Hess straightened his clothes, walked to Roland, bowed formally and respectfully, and said, "Thank you for your help. I will never give up everything you have done these days. If you need my help in the future, please let me know. I will do my best." Looking at Hess in front of him, Roland also politely returned the greeting according to the etiquette of the Tower of Truth and said, "If necessary, I will naturally not be polite." Although Roland did these things to a certain extent because he was willing and wanted to do them, so he did them. Another part of the reason was because of Hela. Since Hela and Sophia had met and known each other, and if Hela was interested in helping Sophia, Roland would not mind supporting Hela's kindness. It would be a good thing to cultivate Hela's kindness. No matter what the reason was, it was always good for her to do good things. Of course, although Roland did not think of seeking any reward for this, since Hess had spoken, Roland would naturally not refuse. After all, Hess was a 6-ring spellcaster, and he might soon break through to become a 7-ring spellcaster. Once he broke through to become the 3rd high-level spellcaster of the Soul School, then Hess would naturally become a top figure in the Soul School and naturally become one of the top leaders of the Truth Council. Regardless of whether Hess becomes a 7-ring spellcaster or a high-ranking member of the Council of Truth, at least, he can bring considerable help to Roland on the side of Signer. Damn, it's timed, my attendance record is gone. Chapter 125. After briefly chatting with Heiss and leaving a few bottles of alchemy potions to stabilize Sophia's mental condition, Roland and Hela left here silently without staying here longer. Roland's matter has been completed, and everything goes well for Sophia. Not only has her mind been restored, but she has also successfully completed her sublimation and been promoted to a 4th-ring spellcaster. There is no need for him to stay here. As for Hela, after seeing that Sophia's breathing was stable and her life was safe, she was relieved and no longer worried about her life safety. Although Roland didn't ask her to leave together, if she wanted to stay, she could. However, after learning about Sophia's experience of splitting her mind, Hela also didn't know how to face Sophia. What would happen to Sophia after she reunited her mind? What does it look like? Hela didn't know, so she chose to leave. Not long after Roland and Hela left, in the meditation room, the surge of aura on Sophia's body regained control. Then, she opened her eyes and saw Hess in front of her. Sophia stood up, saluted Heiss, and greeted him politely. "Lord Heiss, long time no see." Hess smiled and said in a helpless tone while handing her the alchemy potion left by Roland. "No need to be so formal, just drink this." Sophia didn't answer, took the alchemy potion and drank it all in one go. While the alchemy potion was taking effect, Sophia also slightly expanded her mental power and sensed the surrounding situation. After not sensing Roland and Hela, Sophia subconsciously pursed her lips slightly. Although she was being promoted, because she had no sense of security, she was still relatively sensitive to the surrounding environment, especially after Roland interfered with her promotion. After her mind was reunited, even during the process of soul sublimation, Sophia used part of her energy to perceive a circle around her. Although she couldn't sense the virtualized Roland, she still knew of Roland's existence. At the same time, she also sensed the existence of Heiss and Hela. It just so happened that Sophia was also a little unsure about how to face Hela, so she breathed a sigh of relief after not discovering Hela. Hess looked at Sophia and said, "As for your plan, stop it for now. I'm going to be promoted to the 7th ring. If I succeed, I will rescue your mother. If I fail, you can continue." Sophia had some surprise on her face and looked at Hess in surprise. How many years has Hess been in the 6th ring? One of the main reasons why Hess accepted Sophia's mother as his student back then was that Hess believed that it was unlikely that he would be able to break through and become a 7th ring caster. Therefore, he gradually slacked off and took in a student. Although Heiss cheered up again after bringing Sophia to the Black Territory and was exploring the possibility of promotion. However, Sophia clearly remembered that when she last met with Hess, Hess still made no progress. Is it because of Hela or the person next to her? Sophia reacted quickly. Since Heiss had little development before, but now he is suddenly preparing for promotion, anyone who is not a fool can know who inspired him by simply thinking about it. The name seems to be Roland. Sophia nodded slightly and agreed with Hesse's words. She is still self-aware. If Hesse can be promoted to the 7th ring, it will indeed be more reliable than her plan. While Hesse and Sophia were communicating, Roland and Hella also returned to the room prepared for them by the Soul School. Roland poured 2 glasses of juice from the refrigerator at will. Then, he placed one glass in front of Hella, and he took the other glass of juice and sat across from Hella. Thanks. Hella held the cup on the table with both hands and thanked Roland softly. Roland sat opposite her and took a few sips of juice slowly. Then, he glanced at Hella in front of him and said casually. What's wrong? Hella rubbed her hands together, feeling a little embarrassed. Roland put down the cup and looked at Hella, looking at her silently. Under Roland's gaze, Hella hesitated for a while before choosing to speak. I feel like I'm a little too selfish. Oh? Why do you feel so suddenly? Roland raised his eyebrows slightly, glanced at Hella's body in surprise, and his tone was slightly surprised. That? Hella was a little embarrassed. She lowered her head and suddenly talked about another topic. She said softly. Do you think I helped Sophia? I think so. Roland replied. Actually, I just thought about letting Sophia's surface mind win. Because, in this case, Sophia will be as obedient as she was during this period. Hella said softly. So, do you regret it? Looking at Hella who lowered her head, Roland said thoughtfully. No. Hella shook her head. Why is that? Roland stopped what he was doing and asked Hella. I just realized that the reason I helped Sophia was not just because I sympathized with her. I wanted Sophia to be my friend and satisfy my inner satisfaction. During this period, I often imposed some things on Sophia in order to satisfy my own ideas, vanity, and superiority. My help is not simple. Although Sophia is in a difficult situation, I know that there are many people in this world who are worse off than her. At least she is still alive. No matter how miserable the fallen dignitaries are, they are better than ordinary civilians. I am also a civilian, but I did not help them. Instead, I chose to help Sophia to satisfy my own selfish desires. I am a selfish person. Hella lowered her head and bit her lower lip and whispered. So what? Roland sighed and comforted calmly. Selfishness is not shameful. Everyone has selfish desires. Hella, you are not a saint, and you don't need to be a saint. Moreover, you have not hurt anyone. Doing good things for self-satisfaction is already very good. You are not obliged to help others. You are free to help anyone you want. This is the way the world is. There are too many people suffering. Hella, you can't help everyone by yourself. If you encounter something, help them if you want to. Do your best. Don't feel burdened. Their suffering is not your responsibility. Hella raised her head and looked at Roland. She opened her mouth and asked. What about you? Chapter 126. The Wild Control Area of the Soul School. A tall wizard tower sits beside a black cliff. In the coverage area of the wizard tower, the dense dark elements flow in an orderly manner under the control of the wizard tower. Thousands of undead form clusters and move around the wizard tower. As the cheap labor force characteristic of the necromancer, the undead clusters work continuously under the command of the wizard tower. They mine various mineral resources born after the enrichment of dark elements, and at the same time, they divide the planting areas and plant various dark element vegetation on a large scale. They provide various resources to the necromancer all year round. Just as the undead clusters worked as usual, the direction of the wizard tower suddenly changed the flow of elements. A large amount of dark elements were mobilized, and the element flow changed direction and rushed to the direction of the wizard tower. At the same time, the order from the wizard tower was also passed to the undead clusters under it. After receiving the new order, the undead clusters that worked all year round stopped. In order to save the consumption of dark elements, the undead began to stand still. After the dark elements were mobilized on a large scale, the stable elemental environment around the Mage Tower also changed. In the gradually unstable elemental environment, the planted vegetation began to die in large numbers. However, compared with the ongoing breakthrough, the people in the Mage Tower did not care about this loss. Inside the Mage Tower, Roland was calmly watching Hesse, who was trying to break through the 7th ring not far away. As a veteran 6-ring spellcaster of the Soul School, Hesse naturally has his own private territory. Although because of Sophia, Hess has been staying in the Black Domain for several consecutive years. However, because of the Mage Tower, which can be remotely controlled, his control over his private territory is still strong. In addition, the size of Hess's private Mage Tower is not as tall as the Mage Tower in the Black Domain City. But compared to the school's public Mage Tower, this Mage Tower is at least completely owned by Hess. Therefore, although the scale and value of Hess's private Mage Tower are not as good as those of the public Mage Tower. However, since the private Mage Tower does not need to consider universality, Hess can transform the Mage Tower without any worries. Therefore, after years of accumulation and transformation, Hess's private Mage Tower is undoubtedly the safest place. Moreover, as a private territory, Hess does not need to consider whether the people approaching have malicious intentions. As long as anyone enters his private territory without an invitation, no matter who it is, he has the right to expel and defend himself. Then, in order to avoid the disturbance of external factors, it is natural for Hess to choose to break through here. As the dark elements gather, with Hess as the center, the intense and violent dark elements continue to spread around. Fortunately, these are not deliberately created by Hess, but dark elements that no one controls. Therefore, Roland does not need to waste blessings to improve his strength and cast elemental shields to protect himself. Just opening the passive absorption of dark elements of the Crown of Domination is enough to deal with these problems. Roland stood in the elemental wave, watching Hess, who was steadily breaking through. Roland had already taught Hess the knowledge and skills of the necromancer's promotion to the 7th ring, and told him the various difficulties he might encounter during the promotion and how to solve them. In addition, Roland also shared his experience in helping fan accounts to upgrade in his previous life. It can be said that Roland has already fed Hess with food. With Hess's accumulated foundation over the years, coupled with the knowledge and experience provided by Roland, the possibility of Hess's promotion failure is almost zero. Moreover, Hess is well prepared, and even if he fails, he will not be directly killed by the backlash. Therefore, Roland has no need to keep watching here. However, the reason why Roland wants to stay here is not only to prevent almost impossible accidents and ensure Hess's smooth promotion, but also to escape. What about you? Thinking back to what Hela said to him before, Roland was a little absent-minded. Roland did not answer Hela's question, but chose to change the subject. Perhaps Roland also has doubts and hesitations in his heart. Although Roland has been trying to adapt to this world since he awakened his memories of his previous life. But Roland doesn't like, or hate, this world. As a three-good youth who lived in the golden age of the Human Union's exploration of the universe and received all the compulsory education of the Human Union. Although Roland was aware that his moral cultivation was not very good, he at least reached the average level. Therefore, even if Roland lowered his moral bottom line as much as possible and tried to adapt to this world. But there are still too many things in this world that Roland can't stand. Roland's three views formed in his previous life have a huge conflict with this world. Even if Roland tried to change himself to adapt to the world, he still couldn't adapt to this world. Even if he took the pursuit of power as his goal, he selectively avoided many places where he might not adapt. Like living in seclusion in the Kes Mountains, or coming directly to the Tower of Truth, the freest and most advanced place in Sinner, these are Roland's subconscious choices to escape. But even so, for this world full of feudal nobles, everything Roland saw and heard reminded him that this was a hypocritical, cold, ruthless, and cruel feudal world. Even, the mainstream of this world is still feudalism and slavery. No matter how Roland comforts himself, he still often feels that he is out of tune with this world. Alas! Roland sighed, closed his eyes, chose to continue to escape, and emptied his mind. There is no point in thinking so much, just let it be. Take good care of yourself and Hela, and live peacefully in this world. Anyway, the suffering of other people in this world has nothing to do with him. He is just a passerby and can't do anything. Outside the meditation room, Hela and Sophia are standing on the balcony of the Wizard Tower. Hela stood by the railing of the balcony, leaning on it, looking out of the Wizard Tower calmly. Behind her, Sophia stood in the shadows, behind Hela, silently observing Hela. Because Hela realized that her purpose of helping Sophia was not simple, and she didn't know Sophia's current situation, she was embarrassed to take the initiative to speak to Sophia. As for Sophia, whether it was her surface mind, her deep mind, or her reconciled mind, she was not the kind of person who was good at chatting and finding topics. Therefore, when Hela did not take the initiative to speak, Sophia did not know what to say. In this case, the atmosphere between the two was naturally a little awkward. Chapter 127. Roland and Hela stayed in Hes's private territory for several months. And since Hes needed a lot of elements and energy to be promoted to the 7th ring, he also informed the Soul School in advance, so the Soul School was also aware of Hes's situation. Therefore, after Hes began to be promoted in the private magician tower, the Soul School also issued a notice to the public, notifying all the spellcasters in the school, and informing them that the black domain elements might be a little turbulent in the next few months. Since the Soul School was open, the news naturally spread quickly throughout the Tower of Truth. Although Hes is a necromancer who is not very popular with the mainstream, a high-level necromancer is also a high-level spellcaster, and his status in the Tower of Truth will naturally not be weakened by spell problems. Therefore, when the Tower of Truth had just finished the purge of secret societies and a large number of vacancies appeared, the news of Hes's promotion quickly attracted the attention of almost all spellcasters. The university schools are thinking about what impact a new high-level spellcaster will have on the current situation. If Hes succeeds and chooses to stay in the Soul School, then will the Soul School, which has not been turbulent because of the secret society, take the opportunity to expand? The primary and secondary schools are thinking, if Hes succeeds in promotion and leaves the Soul School, is it possible for them to pull Hes to be their leader, so as to seek the possibility of becoming a university school in the chaotic situation? In addition, the Truth Council also stopped arguing and silently waited for the result of Hes's promotion. Their next decision will be determined based on the result of Hes's promotion. In short, for various reasons, almost all the good groups and forces on the Tower of Truth sent spellcasters to the periphery of Hes's private territory, waiting for the final result of Hes's promotion. They would naturally not try to enter the private territory. According to the rules set by the Council of Truth, entering the private territory requires the consent of the owner, and now, Hes would definitely not agree to anyone's application, especially at the critical moment of promotion to the 7th ring. At the same time, on the official forum of the Book of Wisdom, some famous newspapers also began to report the situation on Hes's side in real time. Under the watchful eyes of almost the entire Tower of Truth, the elemental vortex of the Hes Mage Tower lasted very stably for several months. And as this stable state lasted for more than a month, based on past experience, the spellcasters up and down the Tower of Truth believed that Hes had at worst touched the opportunity for promotion. Even if he failed this time, he would succeed sooner or later if he tried a few more times in the future. Therefore, all forces in the Tower of Truth, including the Council of Truth, began to prepare to welcome a new high-level spellcaster. Among them, on the side of the Council of Truth, they quickly passed the plan for the new disposal of Sophia, and without hesitation abandoned the charges previously pressed on her head, and carried out large-scale deletion and cleanup of various related posts and answers on the forum. At the same time, the Council of Truth also quickly prepared a generous compensation gift, which would be sent to Hes as soon as he was promoted. In addition, when studying the interpersonal relationship between Hes and Sophia, the Council of Truth also followed the clues and discovered that they were on good terms with Hela and Roland. After thinking it over again and again, they decided to do good to both Hes and Roland, and decisively contacted the Silver families of the Silver Empire and began to discuss with them the conditions for releasing the former queen. After all, the Rose War was over. After taking all the blame for the war, the former queen was no longer of great value to the Silver families. Therefore, the Silver Queen could still be exchanged out through the exchange of interests. However, Hes, a 6-ring spellcaster, was not worth the Council of Truth to pay a high price to exchange a 5-ring spellcaster from the Silver families. However, a new 7-ring spellcaster and a high-level spellcaster who was suspected of guiding Hes, the two together were enough for the Council of Truth to pay these prices willingly. Therefore, at the beginning of the 3rd month after Hes began to be promoted, the Truth Council reached a preliminary agreement with the Silver families. At the end of the 5th month after Hes began to be promoted, the elemental vortex that only entered but not exited the private territory slowly calmed down. Under the control of the Mage Tower, some chaotic elemental turbulence in the territory was reorganized and began to recover slowly. A high-level life breath unique to high-level extraordinary people was quickly projected around with the caster as the center. Then, a powerful mental force swept across the private territory, and the chaotic elemental turbulence that might have taken the Mage Tower 10 days and a half months to sort out was instantly calmed down. Seeing the situation in front of them, the casters from various groups and forces outside the private territory naturally realized that Hes had succeeded and he officially became the 3rd high-level caster of the Soul School. The casters on the periphery did not hesitate, and all saluted in the direction of the private Mage Tower to express their respect for the high-level casters. And Hess's mental power was also retracted into the tower after scanning everyone present. After Heiss withdrew his spiritual power, these spellcasters quickly passed on the news of Heiss's successful breakthrough. In less than half an hour, the entire Tower of Truth knew the news. Then, according to the plan prepared in advance, all the groups and forces that were ready to befriend Heiss took action. Of course, they did not visit Heiss's private magician tower directly, but went to the Black Domain. After all, newly promoted spellcasters need time to stabilize their own skyrocketing power and are unlikely to accept visits. According to the past practice of the Tower of Truth, after being promoted to a high-level spellcaster, they basically go to the nearest school city to confirm their level through the process, and the local school will officially announce it to the public. After that, the new high-level spellcasters will also go to the City of Truth to register their identities at the Truth Council and obtain the power of high-level spellcasters. According to the unspoken rules among spellcasters, after the school makes a public announcement, it usually leaves a window for external communication, and this is the best time for them to act and make friends with Heiss. Due to the influx of a large number of spellcasters, the Black Domain suddenly became lively. After the people in the Black Domain waited for another month or two, under the gaze of countless people, Heiss slowly took Sophia out of his private territory and went to the Black Domain openly. When Hess arrived in the Black Domain, all the intermediate spellcasters of the Soul School, regardless of whether they had a good relationship with Hess or not, came out to greet him. Chapter 128. In the central square of the Black Domain, under the gaze of countless people, the staff of the Soul School posted a notice on the bulletin board announcing that Heiss had been promoted to a 7-ring spellcaster and chose to stay in the Soul School. Looking at the notice, the onlookers had different expressions. Some spellcasters who held that Heiss could leave the Soul School looked helpless and regretful, but they also knew that the possibility of leaving was originally very small, and they could directly become one of the leaders of the university school, so why leave the original school? Therefore, although they were a little disappointed, they still prepared their own gifts, ready to recognize Heiss and make friends with him. While the spellcasters in the central square were thinking about how to make friends with Heiss, on the top floor of the public magician tower in the Black Domain City, Heiss was sitting quietly at a table. He handed the parchment in his hand that exuded a magical aura to Sophia in front of him and said, "Take a look, this condition is not bad. If there is anything you cannot accept, don't worry. We can talk about it again in a few days when we go to the City of Truth." Sophia took the parchment, did not answer, and lowered her head to read it carefully. This is the result of the discussion between the Truth Council and the Silver family. Under the pressure of the Truth Council, the Silver family still accepted the request to release the former queen. But the Silver family also has conditions for releasing her. There are all kinds of compensation conditions, not to mention the restrictions on the former queen. The former queen must give up the name of the Silver family and take a new name without any Silver family elements. At the same time, the former queen must give up all memories related to the Silver family and prohibit her from having any relationship with any Silver family. In short, the many restrictions of the Silver family require the former queen not to reveal her identity, and can only live in the Tower of Truth as a wild mage. Moreover, promotion is prohibited, and the strength is required to remain at the level of the 5th ring forever. Looking at the conditions on the parchment, Sophia is generally satisfied. Although there are many restrictions, and some of them are not pleasing to her, she is satisfied to rescue her mother. When Sophia was reading the parchment, Hess also stood up, walked to the window, and looked into the distance calmly. When Sophia put down the parchment and looked at him, he looked into the distance and said, "They should be out of the range of the Tower of Truth." Hearing Hess's words, Sophia pursed her lips and recalled Roland and Hella in Hess's mage tower. Roland and Hella did not come back with them, instead, they chose to say goodbye. Sophia lowered her head and said nothing. "I don't know what they are thinking, leaving at this time. What exactly did they do before?" Hess looked at the direction where Roland and Hella might leave, and muttered to himself. "Is there really someone who will help others without asking for anything in return?" Obviously Hess has been promoted successfully, and is about to become the top figure in the Tower of Truth. As long as Hess revealed a little about Roland's help to him, both fame and wealth would flow to Roland like a tide, but at such an important moment, Roland chose to leave. Why did he help him? Hess thought silently. In the distance where he was looking, at the Soul School, which was also the border of the Tower of Truth, Roland and Hella simply confirmed their identities with the spellcaster badge, and then slowly walked out of the territory of the Tower of Truth. Roland asked in a relaxed tone while walking slowly on the road. For most spellcasters, it would be a pity to come to the Tower of Truth without going to the City of Truth. I should have told you that we will probably not come to the Tower of Truth again in the future. Don't you regret it? If you regret it, it's still in time to turn back now. Beside him, Hela shook her head and responded in a low voice. No regrets. Well, anyway, without the filter, the City of Truth is just a larger city, nothing special. Roland shrugged and said casually. He took out a map of Signer from his space bracelet and began to think about his next goal. Originally, Roland planned to stay in the Tower of Truth for a few years, but he didn't expect to leave early to avoid trouble. Although Roland didn't care much about the trouble caused by Hessa's promotion, Hela seemed to think that she had implicated Roland in order to help Sophia. So, after the two communicated, they chose to leave the Tower of Truth to avoid trouble. Where should we go next? There are not many places in Signer worth visiting for Roland. Looking around, only the capital of the Silver Empire, the Royal Academy of the capital of the Kingdom of Inter, and the mountaintop city of the Dogheads are worth visiting. However, these three places are not as easy to get into as the Tower of Truth. In Ginza, everything Roland needed was in the hands of the Silver family. They were old antiques who valued family heritage very much. Even if they exchanged interests, they probably wouldn't get much valuable stuff. The Royal Academy of the Kingdom of Inter also valued bloodline and noble status. With Roland and Hela's identities as fourth ring spellcasters, it would be difficult to get in. Of course, if Roland could prove that he was a high-level spellcaster, it was not impossible to get in, but the problem was that Roland was only a fourth ring spellcaster with high-level combat power and some high-level knowledge, so it was not easy to get in. As for the latter, the mountaintop city of the kobolds was not that difficult. As long as Roland showed off his dragon language skills, he would probably be invited by those kobolds. As for the kobolds who fanatically worship dragons, Roland would probably be able to exchange what he wanted by learning some dragon language. Oh, by the way, it's not just Signer who can go, Donner can also go and take a look. I don't know what Donner's current situation is, but since we haven't received the big news of the Legend's fall, it shouldn't be particularly dangerous. Moreover, Hela is already a fourth ring, so even if she encounters the main force of the Green Tide, running away is probably not a problem, so should she go and take a look? Roland thought silently. According to his memory of his previous life, although the Green Tide destroyed all the countries of Donner, some hidden buildings with better security measures were still left behind. Although most of the kingdoms in Donner are night kingdoms, Roland still knows about a dozen hidden knowledge treasure houses that store magic knowledge. In addition to the knowledge treasure houses, Roland also knows about various national treasure houses left over from several night kingdoms, which store a lot of resources and wealth. Although it is not good to eat the wealth of the dead, it is better to let Roland take it than to be dug out by the Green Tide to arm themselves in the future. Moreover, since their country is dead anyway, they have no ability to stop Roland from robbing their treasure houses. However, I'd better ask about the news in Donner first. If the situation there is okay and the battle line between humans and the Green Tide is stable, I'll go to Donner to have a look. If not, I can only go to the nearest Ginza first. Although I may not be able to gain anything valuable in Ginza, which is supported by the entire Silver Empire, is not much worse than the City of Truth in terms of appearance. Since I didn't go to the City of Truth, I'll go to Ginza. Thinking of this, Roland closed the map and threw it back into the space bracelet. Chapter 129. Although the Silver Tower has an efficient communication tool like the Book of Wisdom, the self-proclaimed noble spellcasters rarely communicate about the outside world of the Silver Tower on the forum. Even a major change in the ruling policy of the Silver Empire may not necessarily cause any waves on the forum. Therefore, during the time in the Tower of Truth, Roland was not clear about the situation in the outside world. So, after leaving the Tower of Truth, Roland found the nearest city and inquired about various intelligence and news. The Adventurers Association was the main direction for Roland to inquire about news. Although the Adventurers Association's information dissemination speed is not as fast as the Spellcasters Association, compared to the Spellcasters Association, which only pays attention to spellcaster-related news, the Adventurers Association will pay attention to all news. Moreover, the Adventurers Association has also ordered a batch of fixed information exchange tools similar to the Book of Wisdom from the Tower of Truth. Although it cannot be installed in every city like the Spellcasters Association, it can only be installed in large cities, and the remaining small cities, villages, and towns can only be transmitted manually. Compared with the Spellcaster Association, the Adventurer Association not only has more and more miscellaneous information, but also lacks authenticity and accuracy, and is relatively lagging. It is okay in big cities, at most 10 days or half a month late, while other towns may be several months late, or even 1 or 2 years late. However, in addition to having all kinds of intelligence information, the Adventurer Association has another huge advantage, that is, it is cheap. The most expensive intelligence is only a few hundred gold coins at most. Moreover, for most ordinary adventurers, the intelligence they need may even cost only 1 or 2 silver coins. The Adventurer Association focuses on small profits and quick turnover. For Roland, money is naturally not a problem, so he spent more than 100 gold coins to get the intelligence he needed from the local Adventurer Association. Through the news of the Adventurer Association, Roland can easily see that the situation in Donner is not very good. Although the coalition forces regained some lost territory under the counterattack led by the legendary Eleanor, the Green Tide still has an absolute advantage and firmly controls and occupies more than 3/4 of the land in Donner. After all, the coalition has legends, and the Green Tide also has legends, legendary orcs, and Ken Azu will not let Eleanor take action at will. According to the latest news, about half a month ago, Eleanor and Ken Azu had a big battle. The two legends fought for 3 days and 3 nights, and finally the coalition announced that Eleanor had the upper hand. However, as the highest level intelligence, the Adventurers Association will naturally not listen to the coalition's propaganda. Below this intelligence, the Adventurers Association mentioned a more secret news, that is, after the legendary war, Eleanor rarely appeared in public, and the coalition also quietly ordered some high-end alchemical potions for healing from the Spellcaster Association. Combined with the unstoppable Green Tide offensive and the coalition's continuous employment of the large mercenary corps of Siner. After analysis, the intelligence analysts of the Adventurers Association believed that the battle between Eleanor and Ken Azu might end in a draw, or even Ken Azu might have the upper hand. The former is most likely, while the latter is less likely. After all, if Ken Azu had the upper hand, how could he watch the coalition complete the counterattack and recover some of the lost territory? However, Roland could guess the real situation based on the plot of his previous life. The real situation was probably that Ken Azu had the upper hand. As for why Ken Azu watched the coalition counterattack, this involves the secret of legend. In this world, extraordinary power will gradually allow individuals to evolve, sublimate and eventually break away from racial restrictions. When promoted to the 4th level, the knight will undergo a physical sublimation, and the spellcaster will undergo a soul sublimation, and begin to truly break away from the level of mortals. With the gradual improvement of extraordinary power, extraordinary people will have reproductive isolation from mortals, and become more and more unique according to the evolutionary direction they choose. After high-level sublimation, extraordinary people basically evolve into a special subspecies of the original race, and at the legendary stage, extraordinary people will break away from the restrictions of the original race and become unique. It can be said that at the legendary stage, he is an independent race. Moreover, when it comes to the legendary stage, the legendary life personality will also have the ability to influence and interfere with the intelligent races around him, which means that as long as the legend is willing, he can create a brand new race. For example, Donner is mainly composed of knights, and Sinner is mainly composed of spellcasters, which is also due to the influence of legends. There have been several legendary knights in Donner. Under the influence of their power, the humans of Donner are naturally more suitable for the extraordinary path of knights, and the same is true for Sinner, but they are just influenced by legendary spellcasters. And the so-called silver bloodline of the Sinner Silver family is actually the followers who followed Littorio on the front line and were most deeply influenced by Littorio's legendary personality. They and their descendants formed a family. In this world, all families with special bloodlines are basically similar to this situation. And the main race that makes up the Green Tide, the green-skinned orcs, are tools created by Ken Azu with the influence of his life personality. Ken Azu is not a true legend. He has defects in his promotion. Although he possesses legendary combat power, his status has not yet reached the legendary level. He is between the 9th level and the legend, and he is stuck there. Therefore, in order to make up for this defect, he created green-skinned orcs who were completely dependent on him with grey-skinned orcs as the main body, and gave them strong assimilation and aggressiveness, and set off a vigorous Green Tide disaster, trying to cultivate powerful green-skinned orcs through war and blood, and then use green-skinned orcs to complete his own status. Ken Azu's primary goal is to complete his own status, not to conquer and kill. It is precisely because of this reason that the coalition forces can fight back and forth with the Green Tide. Otherwise, even Donner in his heyday was defeated by the Green Tide. How can a group of coalition forces composed of remnants and defeated generals fight against the Green Tide? As for Eleanor, although she is a legend, she is a pseudo-legend who was stimulated by the destruction of her country and family, and she barely broke through with the various blessings and sacrifices of a large number of knights before they died in battle. She can bully the 9th level extraordinary people, but it is basically impossible for her to beat Ken Ieyasu. According to the memory of the previous life, the coalition forces can probably hold out for another 10 or 20 years, and Ken Ieyasu will destroy them when he feels that the coalition forces have no effect on the Green Tide. Roland put the information aside and felt that he didn't need to rush to Donner. It was too chaotic there now. He should wait for the mercenaries hired by the coalition forces to go there first, and then go there when things are more stable. Chapter 130. While Roland was collecting intelligence, he and Hela were resting in the city. On the other side of the Tower of Truth, after the various schools and the Council of Truth shifted their attention away from Hesse, they finally realized Roland's situation. After helping Hesse get promoted, Roland seemed to have never appeared again. At first, since Roland was still active on the forum, they thought that Roland was just too troublesome and didn't want to appear in public at this time. But as time went on, they also found something wrong. Roland's frequency of answering on the forum seemed to be different from before. In the past, Roland was active for a period of time, but now, Roland's frequency of activity is intermittent. After simple intelligence collection and analysis, they naturally came to a simple conclusion. Roland may have left the Tower of Truth. Because the messages Roland sent were all transmitted from outside the Tower of Truth. In order to confirm the information, some high-level spellcasters in the City of Truth also visited Hesse, who was still negotiating with the Silver Nobles. According to Roland's instructions in advance, Hesse did not hold back and directly informed them of Roland's departure. After receiving Roland's news and attitude from Hesse, the schools of the Tower of Truth and the Council of Truth quickly reached an agreement. Although they did not know what Roland's specific thoughts were, since Roland did not want his information to be known to everyone, they did not mind expressing their goodwill to Roland. Then, under the order of the top leaders of the Tower of Truth, all news about Roland's real identity was quickly blocked and suppressed. However, although the information about his real identity was blocked according to Roland's request, they did not care much about Roland's Wisdom Book account, and even took the initiative to let Roland go. Originally, some schools were going to warn or ban Roland's account in order to maintain their school advantages, but now, no school has made this suggestion. On the contrary, after the top leaders hinted that part of Hesse's promotion was due to this account, some mid-level spellcasters began to appear in the Q/U0026A area of the official forum. Especially after Roland casually answered some questions from mid-level spellcasters, even mid-level spellcasters who had not received any hints from the top level ran to the Q/U0026A section of the official forum after hearing the news. With the influx of a large number of mid-level spellcasters, and the even larger number of low-level spellcasters following them, the number of active people in the Q/U0026A section of the entire official forum skyrocketed. Olet was one of the spellcasters who was attracted. He was a wild mage that could be seen everywhere in the Tower of Truth. He had no school background, but because he had some talent in alchemy and could mix some less effective wisdom liquids, he earned a lot of silver points by working for some alchemy shops. In addition, he was thick-skinned enough to establish relationships with some school mages. By working part-time for the schools and accumulating silver points, he barely met his extraordinary needs and climbed step by step to the current second-level strength. However, after reaching the second-level strength, Olet's needs became greater and greater, while the silver points he earned did not fluctuate much from the past. This means that the points he might earn from working for a month might be used up in one experiment. Moreover, as a wild mage, the success rate of Olet's experiments is not very high, and not every experiment will produce results. In fact, he has not made any progress for 2 consecutive years. If he had not heard of Roland's existence, he would have packed up his things, left the Tower of Truth, and tried his luck in the Kess Mountains to see if he could earn some silver points by digging ruins. Holding the rented wisdom book, Olet lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling of the room blankly, recalling the time when he walked into the Tower of Truth with a package on his back, and confidently vowed to become a great mage. As a result, after so many years, he is only an insignificant second-level spellcaster, and has not even touched the shadow of the third level, let alone the fourth-level threshold that blocks more than 90% of the third-level spellcasters. He was thinking wildly in his head, and sighed with some self-mockery. How naive I was back then. Only high-level spellcasters are qualified to call themselves archmages, and he may never become a distinguished 4th-level spellcaster in his lifetime. Just as he was daydreaming, the Book of Wisdom in his hand suddenly vibrated slightly. Who is the idle guy who replied to my post again? Delight glanced at the Book of Wisdom in his hand without any expectation. Although he also posted a question after knowing Roland's existence, there were too many posts in the Q/U0026A area, and Roland could not answer them all one by one. Therefore, after experiencing several excitements and disappointments, Delight calmed down a lot. However, after seeing the latest reply, Delight immediately straightened up. It was Roland's reply. It seems that this is preparing for promotion to the 3rd level. The following is only my personal opinion. The 1st, 3rd, and 7th experimental directions are a bit wrong. There is no need to waste time. Just give up. There is no need to waste time on the 2nd, 4th, and 8th experiments. I recommend you go to the starting city and buy Wood Element Experiment Report 10008, 5th edition. It is not a school knowledge and is not expensive. I remember that you can buy it for 5 silver points. There are similar experimental records in it. You can refer to it directly. If you are not sure, you can try to do it yourself. The 5th experiment is quite interesting. The direction is correct. It is probably because the connecting materials are not good. If you have enough points, you can directly buy lightning wood produced by the Massimo School. If you don't have extra points, you can buy some ordinary silk wood. The older the better. Although the effect is not as good as lightning wood, it can be used. In addition, your magic circle must be optimized. Olette quickly took out a pen and paper, eagerly absorbed and recorded Roland's suggestions for his 5th experiment. After he wrote down all the suggestions, the Book of Wisdom vibrated again. Olette frowned and exited his post. Who would look for him at this time? Just after he logged out, he saw the private post from Roland. He clicked indecisively. A non-school mage? If you are brave enough, send me your meditation method. I can help you take a look and give you some suggestions. I will delete it after 1 day. Please note that if you send it, your meditation method will be used as a sample experiment by me, so if you don't want to, you don't have to send it. Looking at the message Roland said on the post, Olette fell into deep thought and entanglement. Meditation method is the most important secret of every spellcaster. Even if every spellcaster is enlightened by the same meditation method, according to their respective development directions and different knowledge learned and borrowed, the meditation methods that eventually evolved are also different and unique. Even teachers and students will not casually inquire about each other's meditation methods. Is it really okay to give it to a strange spellcaster who you have never seen before? Olette hesitated for a while, and finally, he gritted his teeth and decided to send it to Roland. What value does a wild mage's patched-up meditation method have that would make a big man like Roland specifically target him? Never mind, send it. Olette sent his meditation method to Roland. Then, after he waited for more than half an hour, Roland replied to his message. First, Roland made a simple improvement on the meditation method and provided Olette with the names of books that his meditation method could learn from. From cheap materials published by wild mages to expensive materials sold publicly by some schools, Roland provided a detailed analysis list and told Olette which materials were useful to him and what they were useful for. This was not because Roland took money from others and wanted to help them promote it. It was just that Roland did not want to directly provide a better meditation method, because this was challenging all the schools of the Tower of Truth, so he could use this indirect way to hint at them. Looking at the list Roland gave, Olette wrote it all down first. After completing the record, he returned the rented Book of Wisdom. Standing on the street, Delight looked at the list and decided to buy the cheapest one first to give it a try. Chapter 131. After answering another wild mage's question through the Book of Wisdom, Roland ended his entertainment time today and also closed the Book of Wisdom and the grimoire. He looked at Hella who had just opened the door and said casually while putting the grimoire into the space bracelet. Is the matter done? Hella nodded and replied. Well, according to your instructions, I bought 2 tickets for the ferry with the destination closest to Ginza. With that said, Hella took out the 2 pieces of paper from her pocket. What time is the boat today? Roland stood up, walked towards the door, and asked Hella. The ship will sail in 2 hours. Hella replied while following Roland. Roland nodded slightly, and then the two walked out of the hotel. After walking out of the door, Roland saw the sea level brightly illuminated by the sun. How does it feel? Roland followed Hela to the port not far away, while casually asking about Hela's feelings. I feel nothing. Hela pursed her lips and whispered. Really? So, do you want to continue? Roland said casually. Hela nodded, indicating that she would continue. After leaving the Tower of Truth and obtaining intelligence information from the Adventurers Association, Roland determined his next itinerary. Roland will definitely eat the heritage of Donner's kingdom. Instead of waiting for the green tide to completely rule Donner and then dig it out and use it as waste paper, it is better to give Roland a better deal. At worst, when Roland finishes eating the inheritance and prepares to leave Donner, he will make a copy of all the information and give it to the coalition forces to help them complete the inheritance. Of course, Roland is not in a hurry to dig. Instead of going to Dungnar's front line to be a frontline baby, Roland might as well hang out here in Xenil. After Roland arranged the trip, Hela also took the initiative to make a request to Roland. Give her all kinds of trivial chores that Roland usually handles easily. After Sophia's incident, Hela also figured out that she didn't want to live in the comfort zone provided by Roland all the time. She wanted to exercise her own ability to live. Roland naturally would not refuse and happily handed over everything to her in one go. Roland left everything to Hela, such as route planning, purchasing daily necessities, hotel accommodation, asking for directions and buying tickets. Although some were not very skilled, and some minor problems occurred, such as not taking into account the obstacles in route planning, buying less or more daily necessities, misreading the map and taking the wrong road, etc. However, these are all minor problems, and it just takes a little more time. Overall, Hela can handle these trivial matters normally. I want to retract my previous review. Roland looked at the ship in front of him and complained silently in his heart. How can you find a ship at random, but there are so many ships in the whole port? How do you find this kind of ship accurately? In front of Roland and Hela is a relatively tall ship. From the appearance, the ship in front of them does not seem to be much different from the nearby ships. However, with Roland's rich experience, he still saw something was wrong with the ship in front of him. Looking at the crew on the ship who were performing routine maintenance on several elemental cannons, Roland saw the hidden symbols on their sleeves. According to Roland's research on the Silver Noble badge, if he read it correctly, the symbol must be at least an Earl. So, this is a Count's ship? Roland used his magic to secretly scan the entire ship and confirmed the situation on it. They were all low-level extraordinary beings and there were no special extraordinary materials. It seems that the problem is not big, it is just a noble smuggling ship disguised as an ordinary merchant ship. After confirming that there were no strong people, Roland followed Hela onto the boat. Although in order to avoid trouble, Hela only used the second-level spellcaster badge when buying the ticket, but a transcendent is a transcendent. Even a wild mage is a high-ranking figure in the Silver Empire society. Therefore, this disguised as an ordinary merchant ship was naturally very welcoming to Roland and Hela, and directly gave them the best rooms on the ship. Roland sat by the window and calmly stared at the ocean outside. Silver Sea, this is the name of the sea area. It's not because the Silver Sea is full of silver and wealth, it's just because during Litario's reign, the Silver Empire's rule covered this entire sea area, so it was called the Silver Sea. Although after the First Silver Civil War, the southern part of the Silver Empire broke away from a large number of independent kingdoms, so that the Silver Empire lost control of more than half of the Silver Sea in a broad sense. However, due to customary reasons and the addition of it was just a name, so the name Bianhai was still passed down. During Litario's reign, the Silver Sea was actually not taken seriously. Because on the other side of the Silver Sea, there exists a civilization dominated by jackals. After Litorio drove out all the gnolls that invaded the land, the gnolls did not give up. Various gnoll pirates wreaked havoc in the Silver Sea, and from time to time they came ashore to discuss the Silver Empire. As a result, the cost of controlling the Silver Sea was so high that the Silver Empire implemented a strict no-sea policy in the Silver Sea, prohibiting anyone from going to sea. Of course, apart from this, the main reason for choosing the Forbidden Sea was that the Silver Empire at that time focused on trade in the North Sea. In the North Sea, the Silver Empire obtained a large amount of extraordinary materials and huge wealth through trade with moon elves, orcs, kobolds, and even dwarves. So much so that the North Sea was praised by the Sinner people at that time as an ocean flowing with extraordinary and wealth. And the prosperous ocean trade also means the rampant pirates. As long as you grab a transport ship carrying extraordinary materials, you don't have to worry about experiments and promotion materials in the next few years or even more than 10 years. Not to mention the wild mages without roots and factions, even the school mages can't stand this temptation. Therefore, there are many active pirates in the North Sea, and the average level is also very strong. In the era when pirates were most rampant, low-level extraordinary people can be seen everywhere among the North Sea pirates, and there are also many mid-level extraordinary people. There are even 3 pirate kings who have successfully promoted to high-level extraordinary people. However, their glory did not last long. Under the joint stranglehold of the Silver Empire and the Moon Elves, these 3 pirate kings who jumped out were all cold without struggling for a while, and the rampant pirate era also declined rapidly under their joint suppression. However, after Litario's death, the pirates in the North Sea slowly became active again. However, due to the division of the Silver Empire and the birth and diversion of the Silver Sea trade, the North Sea trade circle, which saw a rapid decline in trade scale, had lost the soil that nurtured the golden age of pirates, so that now, several mid-level extraordinary pirates can call themselves pirate kings in the North Sea. Chapter 132. The trade in the Silver Sea originated from the encounter between the Silver Empire's ocean-going fleet and the Sun Elf's ocean-going fleet. In the late period of Litario's reign, after solving the North Sea pirate problem, Litorio also set his sights on the rampant Knoll pirates in the Silver Sea. With the support of the national strength of the Silver Empire during its heyday, Litorio formed an ocean-going fleet to clean up the Silver Sea in just a few years. Later, under Litario's command, this ocean-going fleet easily annihilated all the Knoll pirates along the coast and sailed to the deep sea with murderous intent. Then, they met the Sun Elf ocean-going fleet, which was also heading to the deep sea to clear out the Knolls. After careful contact and communication, the 2 most powerful empires in the world finally officially began to contact. Then there was contact, communication, and trade. Compared to the Moon Elves who are autistic, like to play by themselves behind closed doors, and are indifferent to the Silver Empire, the Sun Elves are relatively more proactive, especially after they realize and taste the amazing profits brought by trade with the Silver Empire. They actively expand trade. It is also official that the 2 empires need each other's goods, and both can gain benefits from trade, so the trade volume between the 2 sides is also expanding. Even if the Silver Empire is in civil war and the First Phoenix Empire explodes, the trade between the 2 sides has almost never been interrupted. Therefore, the trade volume of the Silver Sea is increasing, and the proportion is getting higher and higher. It gradually replaces the status of the North Sea and becomes the most important trading area in Xenar step by step. Moreover, since the ocean trade between the Xenar people and the Sun Elves has to pass through several sea areas, the scope of merchant ships is wider. This also means that they will pass through many sea areas without jurisdiction and control. As long as they are willing, they can change their flags at any time and play the role of pirates. Therefore, the Silver Sea has become a new hotbed for nurturing pirates. Especially after the decline of the Silver Empire and the Phoenix Empire, the pirates who are not regularly attacked by the powerful have become more rampant. At least there are Moon Elves in the North Sea. Pirates who really want to make trouble will basically be killed by Moon Elves with one punch. However, in the Silver Sea, as long as they don't provoke the core interests of the Silver Empire or the Phoenix Empire, the 2 countries will turn a blind eye to some minor fights. Therefore, the pirates in the Silver Sea are the most rampant and the most complex. Some are purely for money, some are running away from crimes, some are white gloves for nobles, nobles who escape marriage, and exiled princes. There are also many active races, including humans, gnolls, dwarves, dog-headed people, sun elves, and trolls. In the Silver Sea, there is nothing that does not exist, only what you can't think of. As for why Roland knows so much about the Silver Sea, of course it is because he has been in the Silver Sea in his previous life. However, he was not a pirate in his previous life, but a bounty hunter. Killing people was his main business, and he would occasionally rob or something. The route to Ginza this time is in the inland sea area, so there shouldn't be any pirates, right? Roland recalled the information about the Silver Sea and thought silently. Although the Silver Sea is very chaotic, the area controlled by the Silver Empire is still relatively safe. There are basically no mid-level pirates, and only some low-level pirates who pose no threat can be active here. Thinking about it, Roland looked at the several extraordinary people he sensed under the deck. Not necessarily, maybe he can really encounter 1 or 2 waves of pirates. Looking at the extraordinary person who was surrounded in the middle and locked up with a depressed breath, Roland thought thoughtfully. However, it doesn't matter. He won't encounter another existence like the Lich King, who is good at undead and space and perfectly restrains him, right? As long as it's not a spellcaster legend who specializes in undead and wears legendary equipment, Roland will not be overturned. Moreover, what about the Lich King? The Lich King who held 1/3 of the crown of domination was still killed by Roland and sacrificed to the dark elemental subplane. If it weren't for the last legendary spell of the Lich King, Roland didn't want to waste the blessing to resist it, but chose to teleport and dodge. After staying in the time and space turbulence for more than 10 or 20 days, he could say that he had quickly passed the Lich King without any damage. Not to mention, Roland now has more backup plans. The blessing in the High Priest's staff has increased a lot after sacrificing the Lich King. There is also the Crown of Domination, which provides a shield of death. Even if he really fails, if he meets any legendary who wants to fight with Roland, Roland dares to fight him head-on. However, this possibility is basically zero. There are only a few legends in this world now. In Sinner, before the countries completed the reform and began to conquer and annex each other, there are probably only 2 legends. One is an old thing hiding in Ginza as the future Silver Queen's grandfather plug-in, and the other is an ultimate antique hiding in a basement somewhere, waiting for the prophesied saint to come to the world. Unless Roland went to dance on their graves, why would they deliberately target Roland for no reason? By the way, I remember that there seemed to be some good things in Ginza. Thinking back to the legend who was hiding in Ginza, Roland's thoughts began to diverge. While Roland was thinking divergently, Hela, who had just finished various trivial matters on the ship, also walked into the room with some food. She put the things on the table in the room and looked at Roland with a strange look. What is she thinking about? Having followed Roland for so long, and Roland was not on guard against her, Hela knew Roland well. Basically, she could guess what he was thinking by just looking at his appearance. However, looking at Roland now, she couldn't see clearly. Was he thinking about something important? However, it seemed that he was in a daze. Hela shook her head and threw the idea out of her mind. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Roland was so mysterious, so powerful, and full of wisdom. He could do anything with ease. How could he be in a daze and waste time here? He was not an ordinary person. He must be thinking about something important. Maybe he was analyzing his gains at the Tower of Truth? Hela nodded and confirmed her thoughts. Then, she carefully pulled out the chair, took out a textbook that Roland had recently compiled from the space bracelet, opened the book, and began to study. Roland was so powerful, but he didn't relax at all. How could she rest here? Hela knew that although she and Roland were both 4th-level spellcasters, their actual conditions were very different and they were not at the same level at all. In order to keep up with Roland's pace, she had to work harder than Roland. When Hela began to learn, the boat moved with a slight shake. Chapter 133. Standing in front of the window, Roland stretched out his hand and caught the rain falling from the sky. Under the blockade of his mental power, the raindrops and sounds from the outside world were perfectly blocked outside the window. I just guessed that there really were pirates coming to the door. Roland felt the rain falling on his palm. A 2nd-level spell that uses the natural environment. It also comes with a slight chill, but it doesn't have much lethality. Even if ordinary people get wet for more than 10 or 20 minutes, they will probably just catch a cold. Is it lack of ability, or is it showing mercy? However, can there be such a spell in the Silver Sea at this time? It's interesting. Roland raised his eyebrows slightly, clenched his right fist, and quickly confirmed the position of the opposite caster using the magic power diluted countless times in the rain as material. Then Roland opened his eyes and looked over. Behind the merchant ship, a small light transport ship was quickly approaching the merchant ship under the cover of rain. On the transport ship, 3 lightly armored warriors were quietly sharpening their weapons, and a spellcaster in a somewhat worn-out robe was taking the time to meditate and restore his magic. Behind the spellcaster, an assassin lurking in the shadows was silently playing with the dagger in his hand, and beside him, an archer was holding a bunch of tools to maintain and repair the longbow. 3 fighters, 1 assassin, 1 bow, and 1 spell. Roland glanced at them and found that their strongest was only a 2nd-level warrior and a 2nd-level spellcaster, and the rest were 1st-level extraordinary people. In addition to these 6 extraordinary people, there were more than a dozen ordinary warriors on the transport ship who were holding weapons, had trained their bodies, and had some traces of breathing techniques on their bodies, as well as ordinary crew members who were responsible for handling trivial matters and rowing. Although for Roland, a spell could solve them, but if it was the garrison on this merchant ship, it might be overturned. Roland glanced at them again. After looking them up and down for a few times, Roland hesitated and retracted his perception. He retracted his wet right hand. A ball of fire ignited on his right hand, and then it passed through the place wet by the rain, and Roland's arm immediately became dry. After using a spell to deal with the rain on his body, Roland closed his eyes, evoked the magic power in his body, and constructed a relatively complex 4-ring spell model. While Roland was casting the spell, Hela, who was resting on the bed, also opened her eyes in a daze. She tilted her head to look at Roland, and then, under her control, the strong negative energy quickly stimulated her brain and made her quickly alert. Without any hesitation, she immediately got out of bed, took the magic book out of the space bracelet, and looked around vigilantly. At the same time, the grey crow hanging on the pillar of the room to rest also quickly disappeared into the room under her urging. The virtual grey crow flapped its wings and vigilantly scanned the surroundings. Then, without finding anything, it decisively went deep into the virtual world and hid in the corner of the room. While carefully observing the surroundings, it asked Hela, "Where is the danger she mentioned?" A trace of confusion flashed in the eyes of the grey crow. Just when the man and the bird were nervous because of Roland's actions. Outside the room, with the sailors paddling hard, the transport ship quickly stuck to the side of the merchant ship. Then, the assassin in the shadow took the lead. He picked up a few thick ropes, and after a short run up, he ran directly on the hull of the merchant ship and ran directly to the deck. Then, he tied the thick rope to the pillar on the deck and swung the thick rope at a certain frequency. Everyone on the transport ship who received the news also quickly climbed onto the deck through the thick rope. Including the caster, although his physique was completely at the level of an ordinary person, he still gritted his teeth and climbed up by himself. After everyone boarded the deck, everyone looked at the only spellcaster present. Under everyone's gaze, he panted and took out an iron plate with a pointer on it from his pocket. After he injected a little magic power, the pointer quickly turned and pointed to the bottom of the merchant ship. After confirming the location, several extraordinary people present nodded to each other, made a few gestures, and reached a tacit understanding. Then, they formed a formation, protected the spellcaster in the center, and ran towards the entrance of the lower deck. Because the spellcaster's physique was not very good, in order to save time, 2 strong ordinary warriors directly joined forces to carry the spellcaster up, and followed the team with a look of despair on his face. After the assassin quietly unlocked the door of the entrance, the group quietly sneaked into the lower deck. At the same time, in the best room on the deck, Roland also calmly opened his eyes. A hint of understanding and speechlessness flashed in his eyes. Roland snapped his fingers and said to the nervous Hela and Grey Crow, "Okay, there are only a few extraordinary people, there is no danger, don't be so nervous." Hela blinked, and after reacting to Roland's answer, she felt a little shy and her face turned slightly red. At the same time, Grey Crow, who was frightened to death by Hela's reaction, also lifted the virtualization, and flew over quickly like a flash of lightning, and grabbed Hela's face with its right claw. Just as it was about to grab Hela's head, a hand reached out and grabbed the back of its head directly. "Hey? What do you want to do?" Roland grabbed it, smiled at it and said. Looking at Roland's kind expression, the Grey Crow's body trembled slightly, and the whole bird froze. Ever since seeing how Roland killed the Lich King, the Grey Crow has been much more afraid of Roland, fearing that Roland would sacrifice it one day. Although the Grey Crow had no ill intentions, it just wanted to leave a claw on Hela's face that would last for a day or two to embarrass Hela. Of course, this is precisely because it has no ill intentions, otherwise Roland would not just catch it. Although Hela was wrong this time, it is not good to do something to a girl's face. As Roland spoke, he took out some undead blessings from the High Priest's staff, processed them simply, and injected them into the Grey Crow's body. After the processed blessings entered the body, after realizing the benefits of the processed blessings, the Grey Crow's eyes lit up, the whole bird was no longer stiff, and the body was no longer shaking. It turned its head and looked at Roland directly, showing a flattering expression. After injecting all the processed blessings into its body, Roland let it go. However, after Roland let go, the Grey Crow did not return to Hela. Instead, it put aside what had just happened, hugged Roland's thigh, and looked at him eagerly. "That's all. Don't look at it. I won't give you more if you look at it again," Roland said unhappily, glancing at the Grey Crow on his leg. "If you still want it, do your duty as a magical pet." Chapter 134. After listening to Roland's words, the grey crow turned his head and looked at Hela eagerly. However, it was too much to ask Hela to speak to it. Hela lowered her head and ignored its eyes. Tisk. Roland reached out and lifted the grey crow up again. Then, he looked at Hela and said, "Where are the pills I prepared for it before? Take out a can." Hearing Roland's words, Hela also raised her head again, followed his words, took out a can full of black pills from the space bracelet, and handed it to Roland. These were the small pills that Hela bought a lot of cheap dark element materials when she was at the Soul School, and she made them for the grey crow herself. For the grey crow, although it was just a small snack, it would still be good for long-term consumption. Roland took the can of pills, and then took out some blessings from the high priest's staff, processed them and injected them into it. After noticing Roland's operation, the grey crow held by Roland immediately looked at the jar in his hand with eager eyes. However, although eager, the grey crow did not dare to do anything and could only watch. After saving the blessing in the pill, Roland handed the jar back to Hela and instructed. "I give it to you. If it is usually obedient, feed it a few pills. If it is not obedient, there will be no." Hela nodded, and under the eager gaze of the grey crow, she put the jar back into the space bracelet. After Roland put it on the grey crow, it also flew to Hela's shoulder and showed a flattering expression. "There is a good show about to happen. If you are interested, you can follow me. If you are not interested, you can rest in the room." Roland ignored their situation and walked to the door of the room. After leaving a word, he pushed the door and walked out. Hearing Roland's words, although Hela didn't know what was going on, she did not hesitate and decisively followed Roland. Hela held up an elemental shield to block the rain from outside, and ran quickly to catch up with Roland. Due to the influence of the rain, there were not many sailors on the deck of the merchant ship, and since there was no one to supervise them, several sailors shrank back and did not want to patrol in the rain. Therefore, Roland and Hela arrived at the entrance below the deck smoothly. Looking at the entrance that was locked again, Roland stretched out his right finger and pressed on the door lock. Weak magic power poured into it and easily pried open the door lock. Then, Roland pushed the door and walked in. Deep below the deck, in a secret room, a young man in light armor was looking at the prisoner in the cage in the center of the room with hatred. In the cage in the center of the room, a man with his limbs chained, kneeling on the ground, his clothes tattered, and with countless wounds on his body was resting with his eyes closed. The young man in light armor picked up a piece of red-hot iron and showed a cruel smile to the man in the cage. "Don't worry, the boss asked you to be sent there alive, so I won't kill you." As he said that, the young man inserted the hot iron block directly into the man's right leg. As the hot sound rang slightly, a smell of cooked meat came from the man's right leg. The man didn't show any reaction to this, and his expression didn't change at all. "I'm curious, how much benefit did they give you, or do you have any handle in their hands? A superhuman, how could you be reduced to being a subordinate of the garbage of human traffickers?" As he said that, the young man picked up another piece of iron and stuck it directly on the man's right cheek. Hiss! Looking at the man who didn't change his face and didn't want to say a word, the young man gritted his teeth and said, "Speak, why don't you speak?" As he said that, the furious young man threw the iron clamp in his hand aside, slapped the man twice, grabbed his clothes, and forcibly lifted him up, cursing. "You beast, their parents sacrificed their lives for the country, you bastard, why do you still want to attack them? I'll fuck you to death." The more the young man cursed, the angrier he got. He raised his leg and kicked the man, sending him flying and crashing into the wall of the cage. After kicking him, the young man was still cursing. "Don't let me find your home, or I'll kill your whole family." Just as he was cursing, a soldier also ran in hurriedly. He came to the young man's side and whispered a few words. After hearing what he said, the young man frowned slightly and said, "Someone is coming. Are you ready?" The soldier nodded and responded, "Adjutant Ling has made all the arrangements." "Yet." The young man nodded, walked to the side of the room, and took down the battle axe on it. He closed his eyes, and his right hand crossed the blood-stained battle axe. Then, he opened his eyes full of coldness and ruthlessness. "Let's go." After saying that, he walked out of the room with his battle axe in hand, and the soldier who had delivered the message followed him closely. Outside the room, all combatants, including the extraordinary ones, had put on their equipment and taken their weapons. In the dark corridor with only a faint firelight, the team that had quietly landed on the transport ship was moving forward silently, and the surrounding environment was a little strangely quiet. The spellcaster who was being carried seemed to have suddenly realized something, and glanced around anxiously. After hesitating for a while, the increasingly uneasy spellcaster glanced at the second-level warrior standing in the front and whispered, "It seems that something is wrong." Before he finished speaking, the wooden wall of the corridor was torn apart, and several heavy infantrymen rushed into the team like a beast, forcibly cutting the team apart. Then, other extraordinary people and soldiers filed out from the gap torn open by the heavy infantry and killed the landing team. At the same time, from the far side of the corridor, a young man wearing light armor and holding a battle axe also rushed straight towards them at an astonishing speed. His first target was the only second-level warrior on the opposite side. Bang! The two weapons collided, and a crisp metal collision sound followed. Before the second-level warrior could react, the young man instinctively raised his right leg and kicked it. After forcing the second-level warrior back a few steps, the young man swung the battle axe and killed several ordinary people nearby. As the blood spurted out, the strong smell of blood quickly filled the crowded corridor. The axe youth smelled the familiar smell of blood, and his body quickly became hot, and he seemed to be ready to move. He looked at the second-level warrior who was forced back by him and said coldly, "So there are adventurers involved." Chapter 135. The second-level extraordinary being forced to retreat did not hesitate at all, and did not even look at the corpse beside him. He used breathing methods to increase the pressure on his body and reached the limit. Google searched "can." Then, he kicked his feet and rushed towards the young man in light armor in front of him with a long knife. Although the young man in light armor looked contemptuous and looked down on the adventurer, he did not relax because of this. He waved his battle axe and also went up. Bang! 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 The sound of countless collisions sounded in the corridor at a very fast frequency. The aftermath of the fight between the two people continued to impact the corridor, tearing and blowing away the wooden walls around. While the two were fighting, the remaining extraordinary people and warriors also fought each other and mixed together. After being divided into several parts and mixed together, the garrison on the merchant ship obviously had an advantage. Compared with most enemies who had little coordination, the soldiers guarding the ship were obviously more trained and orderly. The guards formed small formations, cooperated with each other tacitly and neatly, and directly killed the scattered soldiers on the opposite side. Even if the enemy was stronger than the guards, there was a second-level spellcaster who could kill a guard soldier every 3 spells on average. However, the guards were not afraid. Several teams led by extraordinary people directly withstood the output of the casters, and directly killed through the caster's protective layer with more than a quarter of casualties. Under the desperate gaze of the caster, 2 first-level extraordinary warriors full of murderous intent cooperated tacitly to break the elemental shield and cut off his head. Afterwards, after losing the caster and their overall strength was completely inferior to that of the guards, the remaining adventurers were all killed like cutting melons and vegetables. Except for a few survivors left behind, the rest of the landing team were ruthlessly executed even if they knelt down and surrendered. Standing not far from the battlefield, Roland and Hela calmly watched the bloody situation in front of them. Roland was also a little surprised to see this somewhat unexpected result. He had underestimated the merchant ship's defense force. Although they were not very strong, they were surprisingly well trained. He did not expect that at this time, there would be such elite soldiers who dared to fight. Looking at their strong battlefield bloodiness and murderous intent, Roland knew without thinking that these soldiers had crawled out of the meat grinder called the Rose War. But, tisk, what a pity! Just as Roland was thinking, a team that seemed to be cleaning the battlefield walked to the edge of the battlefield, lowering their heads to deal with the corpses. Suddenly, they tacitly pulled out the crossbows hanging on their waists, not caring about any losses at all, and fired wildly in Roland's direction, while those without crossbows threw their weapons with full force. Then, they quickly dispersed and retreated, and the 2 infantry warrior teams, led by the extraordinary, rushed towards Roland with murderous intent. Roland raised his eyebrows slightly, and his powerful mental power burst forward instantly. The arrows and weapons shot over were also directly controlled by Roland, and they were suspended in mid-air. Finally, Roland showed his figure and stretched out his right hand to the warriors rushing forward. Second ring spell binding. Countless beams of light formed in the air around Roland's right hand, and rushed over quickly, tying up all the warriors who rushed over. When Roland was about to speak, the young man in light armor who had just suppressed and tied up the second-level adventurer also rushed over like a strong wind, and behind him were several heavily armed infantrymen who were armed to the teeth. It seems that I have to beat you up first before you will listen to me. Roland looked at the soldiers rushing over, shook his head, and said helplessly. Then, more beams of light flew out overwhelmingly. In the narrow environment and under the absolute crushing of strength, even if they were veterans who survived the Rose War, they could only hold on for a few more seconds at most, and then they were all tied up by Roland. After tying up all the living soldiers, Roland also walked slowly towards the bloody corridor. Hela followed behind her silently. Looking at the bloody corridor, she did not feel any discomfort. After walking to the edge of the bloody battlefield, Roland snapped his fingers at the fallen corpses. Fourth ring spell Hymn of Life. Strong vitality surged from Roland's hands and injected into the corpses present, the longest of which had been dead for less than half an hour. At the same time, under Roland's control, the heads of the battlefield, or some important flesh and blood organs, also returned to their original positions. Then, under the surprised gaze of the other living soldiers present, the corpses on the ground emerged with a faint breath of life. After all, among the dead, the strongest was only a second-level spellcaster, and they had just died not long ago, and their bodies were intact. It was not particularly difficult to bring them all back with a fourth-level life spell. Of course, if they had been dead for too long, their bodies were incomplete, or there were residual effects of some mid-level or high-level spells, it would be basically impossible to pull them back with a mid-level spell. Otherwise, when Roland was in the north, he would not have been unable to save his parents in this life and Hela's parents. They have been dead for too long. The souls of ordinary people cannot last long without their bodies. They will be integrated into the world in a few days. Moreover, their bodies have been destroyed by the cultists and made into auxiliary materials for sacrifice. They are tainted with the breath of the dark elemental plane, and there is no possibility of saving them. If you want to resurrect, one of the soul and the body must be usable. When Roland revived everyone present, a tied soldier looked at Roland, then at Hela, with a flash of surprise in his eyes. Then, he lay on the ground, squirmed his body, crawled to the side of the light-armored young man, and whispered a few words. After listening to him, the light-armored young man also showed a speechless expression. No, damn it, those idiots on the ship, secretly selling tickets to ordinary people, and using some space to smuggle goods, it's fine, but how dare you let the caster get on board? Do you really think it's an ordinary merchant ship? Moreover, this kind of spell. Will you encounter a fourth-level wizard? The light-armored young man thought to himself. After rescuing everyone present, Roland looked at the tied-up second-level adventurer and the light-armored youth, and said indifferently. There seems to be some misunderstanding between you, why don't you talk about it? I have nothing to talk about with human traffickers. The light-armored youth closed his eyes and said coldly. It's not like he hasn't seen fourth-level spellcasters on the battlefield before. The worst that can happen is death. It's impossible to make him surrender. When the second-level adventurer heard the words of the light-armored youth, his eyes widened and he cursed. Fuck you, you cultist's lackey, who are you calling a human trafficker? As the second-level adventurer finished speaking, the light-armored youth opened his eyes, and the two looked at each other and realized the problem. Chapter 136. So, you are really not human traffickers? In a neat room, the light-armored young man sat at the table and said with some surprise. Bang! The second-level adventurer slammed the cup on the table and shouted loudly. Fuck, if you say I am a human trafficker again, I will fight you. Don't think you can slander me just because you can beat me. I just took a commission to save people. Damn, I lost this time. The light-armored young man frowned slightly and asked. Who commissioned you? The second-level adventurer glanced at him, then looked at Roland who was watching the show on the side, and hesitated. Don't worry, tell me, it's okay. Roland said casually on the side. A bunch of brats. After hesitating for a while, the second-level adventurer finally gritted his teeth and said the client. The light-armored young man frowned and looked at him suspiciously. Just when he was about to say something, Roland knocked on the table lightly, attracting the attention of everyone in the room. After everyone looked at him, Roland stretched out his right hand, and a bird's-eye view of the village appeared in front of everyone. You are talking about these children, right? As Roland spoke, he also controlled the bird's-eye view and showed the faces of all the children in the village one by one. Yet, looking at the faces of the children shown by Roland Jean, the second-level adventurer nodded helplessly. Although he was kind-hearted and accepted the commission of these little brats for little reward, he still had to be responsible for his team. He was finally rescued by Roland, and he couldn't take risks for these unfamiliar children again. When he saw the faces of the children, the young man in light armor couldn't sit still. "No, that's not right, aren't they dead? Did you see it with your own eyes? Maybe, you can ask the one you locked up in the cage, and ask why he did this." Roland retracted his right hand, and the picture disappeared. Hearing Roland's words, the young man in light armor stood up with a gloomy look, and left in a hurry with the garrison soldiers. Roland and Hela followed slowly behind him. As for the adventurers, after looking at each other silently for a few times, they still did not take the opportunity to escape, and followed him honestly. "Speak, I told you to speak." When Roland walked into the deepest room, he saw the young man in light armor grabbing the prisoner in the cage and shouting loudly. "Third level spell healing." Roland looked up and down at the prisoner full of scars and cast a healing spell on him. Under the effect of the spell, the prisoner's injuries quickly recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, the prisoner moved his eyes, looked at Roland, then looked at the young man in light armor, and closed them again. "Fuck you." Seeing that the prisoner didn't want to talk at all, the anxious young man in light armor cursed and wanted to fight again. Roland, who walked behind him at some point, grabbed his eager hand and said, "Why don't you let me try?" Hearing Roland's words and Roland's powerful strength, the young man in light armor gritted his teeth, said nothing, threw the captive on the ground, and gave up his position. Afterwards, Roland walked in front of the captive and lifted his face with his right hand. First level spell charm. Although the first level charm cannot directly modify the cognition of the extraordinary, it can still make people feel good and trust the caster inexplicably. As the spell took effect, the captive's attitude towards Roland was no longer so resistant. "Tell me what happened." Roland's voice came into his ears. Then, the captive with a confused look in his eyes opened his mouth, and under Roland's hint, he told everything. He was a brave extraordinary who heard that there were active human traffickers in the nearby villages, stealing orphans from various villages and selling them as commodities. Therefore, he took the initiative to inquire about the news, relying on his own strength and wisdom, killed a guy who looked similar, and mixed into the human traffickers' organization. Afterwards, he took the initiative to lead the team, in the name of arresting people, to invade some villages that had been prepared in advance. By cooperating with the people in the village, he killed all the people he brought over in the village. Moreover, in order to avoid suspicion, he also recruited some people who hated human traffickers into the organization, and brought some brave children back to the organization as trophies. Then, he took these children under his command on the pretext of training slaves. With this trick, he killed most of the combat power in the human trafficker organization and replaced them with his own people. Moreover, because people died quickly, he became an old man and his status in the organization rose rapidly. Then, using his own people's boasting and private threats, he took all the organization's slave training business into his own hands, snatched all the children in the organization who were not in his hands, and interrupted the organization's arrest work on the grounds that they might be targeted and hunted. Originally, he was almost ready and planned to close the net and destroy this Go-Ba organization. Just when he was taking the people of the organization out, preparing to find an opportunity to finally kill them, he met a team led by a young man in light armor. Needless to say, he was hung up and beaten by the team led by the light-armored youth. If he was not the leader and was worth interrogating, he might not have survived until now and would have been hacked to death. As for why he did not answer the light-armored youth's questions, it was simply because he did not trust him and did not listen to a word he said. Listening to the captive's narration, the light-armored youth frowned and looked suspicious. On the side, the second-level adventurer raised his hand and said, "I can testify to this. It is true. I received the commission and walked in openly under the leadership of them and hacked the leader of the human trafficking organization to death directly. The reason why we came to save him is that we know his situation and admire his character, so we came." Although the adventurers were willing to guarantee, the light-armored youth still did not believe them. In response, Roland looked at the second-level adventurer and said, "Tell your people to go back to the transport ship. There are a few children hiding on your ship. They have been caught by the people left on the ship. Bring them here." The second-level adventurer was a little surprised. However, he had never seen a spellcaster as powerful as Roland. Maybe he used some powerful spell? He guessed so and gave a few glances to the people beside him. After receiving his hint, they turned around and walked out of the room, ready to go to the transport ship outside to check the situation according to Roland's words. Chapter 137. After the adventurers brought the children on the transport ship up, the young man in light armor had a private conversation with them and finally believed what the captive said. After the atmosphere between the two sides became a little harmonious, Roland didn't bother to care about how they negotiated next, and took Hela back to the room. What do you think? Roland sat at the table and asked Hela, who was thinking in front of him. Hela thought for a while and said hesitantly. The importance of communication? If the captive didn't say a word, but chose to explain, maybe there wouldn't be so many things. And strength, only if you are strong enough and suppress everyone, can you make them listen to you honestly. Roland looked at her with some surprise and said. Well, that's right. Your mouth is for talking. If you don't say anything, how can others know what you are doing? In addition, the Tower of Truth is the place with the highest average quality in the Silver Empire, but even there, you have met some unreasonable idiots, and there are even more stupid and bad guys outside. If you meet a guy who doesn't understand human language in the future, don't waste your breath on talking about reason. Beat him up first. I teach you reason so that you can reason with idiots calmly, and I train you so that idiots can reason with you calmly. Hela nodded obediently. Because Roland showed his strength, the crew of the entire merchant ship became more respectful to the two. As for the adventurers, after explaining the misunderstanding, the garrison soldiers also let them go, but the captives were not let go. They were just released from the cage and placed under house arrest in a room. Roland didn't bother to care about what agreement they reached between them, just pretending that nothing happened. The next few days of sailing went smoothly, except for a group of rookie pirates who were sunk by elemental cannons within 2 minutes of approaching. On a sunny afternoon, the disguised merchant ship, like other merchant ships, quietly stopped at the busy port. Several sailors on the edge of the merchant ship waved to the port workers who came over and shouted at them. No goods, don't come over. While the sailors drove away the port workers who came over, Roland and Hela also left the merchant ship directly. Not long after Roland and Hela left, a sailor captain on the merchant ship also ran over in a hurry. He looked around, patted the sailor who was leaning on the edge of the ship, and asked. Did you see the two on the ship? Which two? The sailor who was questioned scratched his head, but he quickly reacted and continued. Oh, are you talking about the two wizards? They just got off the ship. Ah? Already got off the ship. The captain patted his head and said with some regret, then he glared at the sailor and cursed. Don't you know how to stop them? Ah? I'm stopping the wizards, is that true? The sailor was stunned for a moment, pointed at himself with his right finger, and said hesitantly. He was an ordinary person, even if he had been trained and his physical fitness was better than that of ordinary people, but if he really went forward to intercept them, he might be killed by a fireball. The captain also knew that it was a dream to ask the sailor to stop the extraordinary people, and he himself didn't dare to go up. So, he just said it casually, so after he finished speaking, he didn't listen to the sailor's answer, and turned around and ran back to the merchant ship. Because of the robes they were wearing, almost everyone in the port would take the initiative to give way. Therefore, after leaving the merchant ship, Roland and Hela also left the port smoothly and quickly. Standing outside the port, Roland glanced at the sign next to the port exit, and then at the map in his hand, confirming that he was not in the wrong place. Roland's right hand moved upward from a black dot city on the map. After passing through a dozen black dots of different sizes, he stopped at the largest black dot. Next to this big black dot, there was a string of characters written in the universal language of mankind, Ginza. After reconfirming the route, Roland looked at Hela beside him and asked. Are you tired? Should I rest here for a night today, or continue on my way? Hela shook her head and replied in a low voice. Not tired, I can continue on my way. Roland looked at her and confirmed that she didn't look tired before putting away the map. Afterwards, the two bought 2 horses in this port town and rode north. Since Hela has been promoted to the 4th ring, she has entered a period of expansion of the combat power of the extraordinary and needs to settle down. In order to continue to advance, in addition to conventional knowledge and resources, it is necessary to spend time settling down and have a firm will. The disintegration of the soul protective membrane frees the soul of the caster from its shackles and gives it more room to grow, but it also means that the soul of the caster loses its protection. In the past, under the effect of the protective membrane, no matter how the soul of the caster strengthened itself, the overall structure would remain in the form of a human. After losing the protective membrane, the human-shaped soul turned into a soul ocean, and the caster could only rely on his own will to control and lock his soul ocean. However, this is not a mandatory requirement. If it fails directly, it is not impossible to give up control and lock at the cost of a significant decrease in strength and loss of promotion possibilities. Because every promotion after the 4th level is a challenge to the soul ocean, the caster needs to have enough will to resist the huge waves and storms set off by the soul ocean during promotion. Moreover, in the process of confrontation, the stronger the soul becomes, the test of will becomes stronger. As for weakening the soul and reducing the intensity of the test to skip classes, it is impossible. After all, if the soul strength is not high, it will not meet the promotion requirements. Therefore, in order to temper Hela's will, Roland did not avoid most towns and villages in a carriage as before. If Hela studied quietly in the carriage like before, she would not be able to exercise her will. Therefore, on this trip to Ginza, Roland chose to walk, ride a horse or take a car or boat like an ordinary adventurer. As the sun slowly set, Roland also rode up a small hill. Under the setting sun, he saw a small village in the distance. Looking at the small village in the distance, Roland looked at Hela beside him, pointed at the village and said, "Tonight, would you like to go over there and ask me to stay overnight?" Chapter 138. Bah! With the sound of horse hooves, Roland and Hela approached the village on horseback. This is a small village. When Roland gets closer, he can see the entire village in his sights. Based on the size of the village in front of us, it is estimated that only 20 or 30 families can survive. Looking at the animal skins hanging in each house and the scattered small farmlands around the village, Roland guessed that this was probably a village mainly focused on hunting. Since Laura and Hela did not hide the sound of horse hooves hitting the ground, when the two approached the villagers in the village also took out their weapons and looked at Roland's direction warily at the village gate. The hunters held their hunting bows and hid behind various wooden railings. A soldier in light armor held a long knife and stood in the center of the village entrance. Behind him, a man wearing animal skin clothing, militiamen armed with wooden spears gripped their weapons. Just when they were alert, Roland and Hela stopped not far from them. Seeing Roland and Hela stop, most of them breathed a sigh of relief. Then, Roland glanced at Hela. Hela met Roland's gaze, nodded and rode a few steps forward. After getting a little closer, she dismounted and communicated with the light-armored soldiers standing in the center of the road. While Hela was communicating, Roland also casually looked at the villagers at the entrance of the village. Compared with the villagers Roland had seen before, the residents of this village were relatively thinner, and their clothes were mostly patched. Even the guys who ate had shabby hunting bows. The eyes looking at Roland were also full of awe and fear. This is the most common village in the world, which is ignorant and backward. Roland had seen before, whether it was a village of cultists who became wealthy by offering sacrifices and cannibalism, or a village under the rule of the Tower of Truth, which was strictly controlled and had a school guarantee, their prosperity and peace were rare in this world. Since Roland had been well prepared, the two of them not only had spellcaster badges, but also certificates issued by the Adventurers Association. Therefore, Hela quickly completed the communication with the light-armored soldiers. Then, the lightly armored soldier took off his helmet, revealing an old head. He shouted several times and gestured to the villagers at the entrance of the village. After seeing his greeting, the villagers completely relaxed and left the place in a mess, returning to their respective houses. Later, under the leadership of the old man, Roland and Hela led their horses to a house on the edge of the village. After expressing their gratitude to the old man and paying for a night's stay with some copper coins, the two settled in this wooden house. Although the wooden house is a bit crude and has some accumulation of dust, it is still acceptable after cleaning it with magic. Nothing happened all night. At dawn the next day, when Roland and Hela were about to leave, the sound of heavy and roaring horse hooves resounded throughout the village. Listening to the sound of horse hooves, Roland touched his horse's hair and looked up at the place where the sound came from. A cavalry force of more than 50 people was galloping in from afar. This is no ordinary cavalry team. Almost all of these 50 people are armed to the teeth. They all wore similar white battle armors, and the white horses under their crotches also wore matching vests. At a glance, they all were extraordinary and of good quality. Except for 2 or 3 who are relatively far apart and are still at the first level, the rest are all at the second and third levels. In the front row of the team, there are 2 4th-level knights. Such a strong force? Which knight is he from? Roland glanced twice and didn't recognize it. Although Roland saw some patterns on their armor, through these patterns, Roland could only tell that they were most likely a religious knighthood that believed in the pantheon. As for the specific knighthood, Roland couldn't tell. Similar religious patterns would basically be used by religious knights. Moreover, in his last life, Roland was running all the way on the road of the Master and had basically no contact with religious forces. Most of the people he knew were the knights who became famous later. Moreover, after the future Silver Queen came to power and during the religious reform, the knights experienced several shocks, splits, disintegrations and a bunch of other messy things. I don't even know how many times they changed. Even if Roland recognized them, he was not sure what their current situation was. However, in the early stages, such a team is a considerable force. Is something going to happen? Roland frowned and thought for a moment, but couldn't find any useful memories from the plot of his previous life. He shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Forget it, it's none of his business, maybe the plot is different from last life. Anyway, as long as it doesn't affect him, Roland doesn't want to worry about it. Thinking this, Roland also withdrew his gaze, packed up and prepared to leave. And on the Cavaliers' team, more than 50 knights stopped at the entrance of the village. Opposite them, the old man who was previously wearing light armor changed into a set of shabby but neat clothes, and respectfully saluted and said hello. Compared to Roland and Hela, who looked ordinary after changing into casual clothes, even if these knights were fools, they knew they were not easy to mess with. The old man had no doubt that they could kill everyone in the village without any damage and without paying any price. Therefore, he did not dare to show any dissatisfaction. At the same time, when the leading knight asked, he also answered all the questions he asked respectfully, saying as much as he knew, and did not dare to hide anything. After racking his brains to answer a few strange questions, the leading knight suddenly looked in the direction of Roland and said, "Has anyone stayed here recently?" Following the knight's line of sight, the old man was sweating profusely. He lowered his head and said in a low voice, "Yes, yes, 2 adventurers stayed in our village for one night yesterday." Yet. The knight nodded, put his right hand on the weapon at his waist, and continued to ask, "Have you paid the accommodation fee?" "Yes." The old man nodded, took out the accommodation fee that Hela had stuffed into his pocket last night, and showed it to the knight. Looking at the copper coins in the old man's hand, the knight was also a little surprised. He put his hand down from the weapon at his waist and nodded slightly. Then, he didn't say anything, turned around and left the village directly with the knights. After the knight left, Roland calmly dismissed the prepared spell model. Roland was naturally aware of the hostility and murderous intent of the leading knight. Looking at the direction the knights left, Roland was also a little surprised, recalling his conversation with the old man just now. Unexpectedly, he was still a white knight who abided by the precepts. He probably thought that Roland and Hela were the kind of trash adventurers who relied on force to do whatever they wanted, and he was ready to help the village to eliminate them. However, after knowing that Roland had paid, he did not take action directly, but left a hidden technique at the entrance of the village. If Roland and Hela were just ordinary adventurers, and had malicious intentions, and took action against this village, it would probably trigger this technique and be directly raised by it. Roland glanced at the technique, did nothing, and left the village with Hela. Chapter 139. Just as Roland and Hela were running all the way to Ginza. After a few days of peaceful and smooth journey, the accident still came. On a vast grassland, Roland suddenly pulled the warhorse, raised his eyebrows slightly, and looked into the distance. Although Hela didn't know what happened, she also stopped and looked in the direction of Roland. In the distant sky, a black dot was attacking the two at an alarming speed. Looking at the flying black dot, Hela guessed hesitantly. A 5th-level extraordinary person passing by? No, it seems to be a 4th level. No, why is it flying here? Just when Hela was alert, the crown of domination on Roland's finger also reacted, shaking a few times, and was a little restless. However, when the crown of domination was instinctively agitated, Roland glanced at it. Then, it stopped agitating, like an ordinary ring, without any reaction. It seems that it came for the crown of domination? Since leaving the north, Roland hasn't met such a kind person who comes to deliver supplies for a long time. Come for me, Hela, you try it. Roland looked at the black spot rushing over and the black curtain that quickly unfolded behind him, and said calmly. Hearing Roland's words, Hela nodded, stretched out her right hand, and took out the magic book in the space bracelet. Then, the magic book flipped. 4th level spell Shadow Vortex. Just as the extraordinary flying from the sky rushed over, on his way of charging, the huge dark elements quickly gathered and turned into a small vortex that was pitch black and exuded terrifying power, and swallowed him in one gulp. As the shadow vortex kept turning and attacking the extraordinary in the body, the extraordinary also resisted the attack of the spell, holding the long sword at his waist with his right hand, accumulating power. Just as he was about to draw his sword after a short period of accumulating power, the dark elements around him suddenly became agitated. Hela clenched her right fist, and then the shadow vortex paused for less than a second, turned into an elemental bomb, and exploded directly. The extraordinary person at the center of the explosion naturally faced the bombing directly. After using the armor on his body to resist most of the impact, he swung his long sword. As the long sword was swung, a strong dark elemental force spread out from him to the surroundings, calming all the aftermath of the explosion. Then, he looked at the only enemy in front of him, Hela, in a somewhat embarrassed manner. While he was intercepted by the shadow vortex, Hela also quickly rose into the air and hovered opposite him. Without hesitation, he took out a broken crown from his arms and put it directly on his head. Then, the dark elements that had just scattered in the nearby environment were attracted by it and poured into the crown continuously. Looking at the crown he took out, Hela also looked at it thoughtfully. This seems to be a bit like the crown of domination that Roland had snatched from the Lich King before. Are there other fragments of the crown of domination? Roland should need this, right? Thinking of this, Hela's eyes became sharp, and all the spells prepared in the magic book were released. Words of tranquility, words of protection, iron will, heart gathering, dark element shield, necromancy, blade focus, killing intent perception. A series of spells used to strengthen herself acted on Hela. While Hela cast all the spells on herself, the extraordinary person on the opposite side was not idle either. As the crown of domination absorbed the dark elements, it also began to exert its strength, and a large amount of dark elements were injected into the body of the extraordinary person. Compared to Hela, who did not change much after the protection, the momentum displayed by the extraordinary person was constantly increasing and surging. Hela looked at the knight with a calm face, and chose to attack first. 3rd level spell Shadow Arrow. Around her, countless black arrows formed out of thin air, and then continued to bombard the direction of the knight. When the first arrow was about to attack the knight, he suddenly raised his head and looked at Hela with pale, ruthless eyes. Then, a chip formed by dark elements appeared at his feet. He kicked his lance and rushed directly towards the shadow arrow. Bang! Under the almost endless energy provided by the crown of domination, the knight recklessly wielded his power, and huge and powerful sword lights bloomed one after another, shattering all the shadow arrows. As the knight swept the shadow arrows and approached quickly, Hela maintained the attack frequency of the shadow arrows while preparing other spells. As the knight approached Hela, he raised his long sword, and after a short period of power, he burst out, swinging a black light that almost occupied Hela's entire vision. In response, Hela cast a spell calmly. Flash! As a space wave passed by, Hela's figure disappeared in an instant, and the light swung by the knight fell directly on the plane after losing its target. Bang! With a huge earth rumble, the light directly cut a black crack more than 10 meters long on the plane. As a weak spatial fluctuation flashed behind the knight turned decisively and slashed the long sword with a black glow directly at the place where the spatial fluctuation occurred. Then, in his unexpected eyes, the petite grey crow emerged from the space and avoided his attack with its size advantage. Not good. When the knight saw the grey crow, he realized that something was wrong, and he didn't wait for him to do anything. Hela, who didn't know when she appeared behind him, stretched out her right index finger and lightly touched the helmet on his body. 3rd level spell Material Melting. The armor on the knight was like a piece of white paper, and Hela's index finger poked it in easily. Bang! The moment Hela took action, the knight activated the Crown of Command, and a black wave centered on the Crown of Command quickly erupted in all directions, forcing Hela and Grey Crow back. When the wave broke out, Hela retracted her hand and retreated a certain distance with ease, avoiding the attack of the wave, while the Grey Crow was directly blurring and disappearing. The knight touched the back of the helmet with his right hand. The place touched by Hela had turned into a viscous liquid and was expanding. He frowned, took off his helmet, and threw it away. After taking off his helmet, he also revealed his highly undead head. The Crown of Command was attached to his body, and more powerful energy was injected into his body from the Crown of Command. A barrier of dark elements wrapped around his head, forming a new layer of protection. Hela did not interfere with his movements, but kept moving away. When she was far away, she looked at the knight and snapped her fingers. A large number of spell runes quickly emerged, centered on the knight. While Hela was using third-level spells to fight with him, she had been silently preparing spell runes. Originally, Hela was thinking about how to trick the other party over, but she didn't expect the other party to be so reckless and rushed over directly in cooperation. 4th level spell Bite of Shadow. Chapter 140. With the help of spell runes. Shadow Bite, this is one of the most lethal spells among all the spells mastered by Hela. The spell runes resonated with each other, and then darkness descended on the sky and quickly enveloped the extraordinary. The shadow tentacles exuding terrifying power, as if they had life, rushed madly to the position of the extraordinary. The materialized shadow wrapped up the extraordinary, and on its surface, countless shadows were constantly wriggling. At the same time, in the shadow, the knight also constantly bombarded the materialized shadow matter, so the shadow matter wrapped around him would occasionally synapse a pillar or something. However, even if he could continuously output with the crown of domination, as a 4th level knight, his output was limited every time, and he could not penetrate the shadow matter for a while. Moreover, he had the crown of domination, and Hela's shadow bite could also autonomously absorb external elements to maintain itself. Therefore, even if it is a battle of consumption, shadow bite can last for a long time. Although with the knight's performance just now, the spell should be able to pull him for a long time after falling into the trap, but Hela still did not relax her vigilance. After all, Hela has also seen the power of the crown of domination in the hands of the Lich King. What if the opponent can also take out a legendary spell? Although it is unlikely, it is better to be cautious. Therefore, Hela increased the magic input to Shadow Bite, adjusted and ensured the stability of the spell model, and began to prepare for his new attack after he escaped. Although Shadow Bite is one of the most lethal spells among Hela's spells, it is a large-scale AoE damage, and the damage to a single unit is still not as good as the special individual spell. For example, the youth version of Death Finger, which is weakened from the 7th level spell Death Finger and reduces the complexity of the spell model. After pulling back and forth for a while, the knight in Shadow Bite also calmed down, no longer output madly, but quietly accumulated strength. Seeing that the energy fluctuations of the knight in the Shadow Devourer were getting stronger and stronger, Hela stopped outputting more magic power to the Shadow Devourer after maintaining the lowest level of magic support, and drew more energy to prepare new spells. After both sides accumulated power for more than 10 seconds, amazing energy burst out from the Shadow Devourer. Under the shaking of huge energy, the shadow matter of the entity seemed to boil and twisted wildly. Then, a large number of cracks appeared on the surface of the shadow matter, and dark beams of light continued to shoot out from the cracks. Finally, with a burst of turbulent energy fluctuations, the Shadow Devourer was like a punctured water balloon, and the shadow matter inside exploded and scattered like water droplets, and fell to the ground. However, after losing the maintenance of the spell, the entity of the shadow matter quickly failed, and soon turned into pure dark elements and integrated into the elemental cycle of the world. The broken crown of domination on the head of the 4th level knight bloomed with black light, and continued to flow towards the knight, wrapping him into a pure black night. He retracted the swung sword, looked up at Hela, and raised his empty left hand. The black aura gathered on his left hand, forming a black spear. The knight held the spear, aimed at Hela, and threw it out. Bang! The black spear turned into a black light, and hit Hela's elemental shield straight, and was continuously attacked by the dark elements controlled by each of them, wearing down each other. Because it was strengthened by the crown of domination, the strength of Hela's elemental shield decreased a bit quickly. Just as Hela was about to use flash to dodge like before, a powerful elemental wave swept through Hela's body. Serve the skeleton! Under this spell to control the undead, Hela's body stiffened slightly, and the flash spell she was preparing failed. Due to the effect of the spell that was blessed before, Hela's body was temporarily undead. When she was blessed with the dark element spell and physical strength, it also meant that she would be affected by the spell to control the undead. Originally, as a 4th level spell caster, Hela was not worried about being affected or controlled by the dark elemental knight on the opposite side. In terms of control over the undead, how can the knight compare with the spell caster? However, the knight did not release the skeleton, but the broken crown of domination on his head. Then, the black gun shattered the elemental shield that lost its magic support and pierced Hela's left shoulder straightly. Before Hela could react, the knight had already rushed in front of him. He raised his sword and released his full-strength attack on Hela, ready to completely wipe out Hela and take away his trophy. Trophy? No, why didn't she have the fragments of the crown of domination on her? When he swung his full-strength attack, the knight suddenly realized that something was wrong. Didn't he see two people before? The fragments of the crown of domination seemed to be on that man, but where were the others? However, although he reacted, he still chose to swing his full-strength attack first. A trace of fear flashed in Hela's eyes on her left shoulder, and she raised her right finger tremblingly, as if she wanted to struggle again. Disappeared. Hela's figure quickly faded, and the knight's full-strength attack directly passed through her transparent body and blasted into the distance. A huge dark element swept across the sky, and a huge air wave instantly swept away everything in the sky. A huge crack was torn in the earth. Under the strong erosion of the dark element, all the vegetation within hundreds of meters of the crack withered and died instantly, and it was still spreading. At the same time, Hela's virtual finger also touched the knight's forehead. 4th level spell Finger of Death, Youth Edition. The knight widened his eyes and kept communicating with the crown of domination, desperately resisting this fatal attack. However, before he could get much support from the crown of domination, the grey crow appeared above his head, and his claws directly grabbed the crown of domination on his head, took it to the virtual state, and forcibly cut off its connection with him. No. After losing the support of the crown of domination, the knight opened his mouth and let out a wail, and then the Finger of Death ended his life. After losing his life, his body also fell from the air and hit the ground, splashing dust. Although it was just a matter of course, Hela was still a little surprised that she had killed the opponent so easily. Hela slowly fell from mid-air. She stood in front of the knight's body and silently reflected on the process of the battle. The knight in front of him was not weak, especially with the crown of domination. If he was more cautious and fought with Hela, he might win. The reason why he lost so thoroughly was mainly because he relied on the existence of the crown of domination and was too arrogant. He had no defense at all and just knew how to rush. Looking at his body, Hela once again told herself that no matter who she fought with, she must not relax. And behind her, the invisible Roland also reappeared with 2 horses. Looking at the knight's body, Roland was also a little surprised. He clearly just used the enchantment spell to make the knight forget Roland's existence. But why was he so reckless? So confident? Roland shook his head in confusion and stretched out his left hand, and the grey crow also appeared in front of him and put the crown of domination in his claws into Roland's hand. Then, this fragment was attracted, and after actively shrinking several times, it was embedded and merged into the crown of domination that Roland disguised as a ring. At the same time, Roland also stretched out his right hand. He first used the crown of domination to absorb the dark element attached to Hela's left shoulder. Then, white and green light appeared on his right fingers. 4th level spell Limb Regeneration. 3rd level spell Life Healing. Under the effect of the combined spell, the left shoulder on Hela's hand recovered rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. After all, Hela's wound was mainly the power of the crown of domination. After losing the power of the crown of domination, it was just an ordinary flesh wound. Even if Roland did not cast a spell to speed up the treatment, with Hela's physique, it is estimated that she can recover by herself after a few days of rest. Chapter 141. Although Roland didn't want to have anything to do with the White Knight, the development of the world was not determined by Roland. After accepting the free fragments of the crown of domination, Roland and Hela did not leave directly. After all, after the fight between Hela and the knight, 2 cracks with thick dark elements were left on the grassland. In order to avoid the environment being completely destroyed, Roland and Hela stayed where they were and spent some time doing some post-war treatment work, purifying and treating the cracks. Roland and Hela had just finished treating the battlefield scars here, and the night team attracted by the battle rushed to the scene. Roland led the horse and looked at the familiar white knight in front of him helplessly. "Isn't this the white knight I met when I stayed in a village before? Is your war horse's horsepower not good? How come the speed is almost the same as Roland riding a pack horse?" When Roland and the White Knight kept a distance and confronted each other, the 2nd and 3rd level knights in the White Knight team silently picked up their weapons. After seeing the other side pick up their weapons, Hela, who was standing next to Roland, also took out the magic book from her space bracelet. The atmosphere between the two sides gradually became tense. In this strange tension, Roland looked at the White Knight in the lead, took the initiative to break the atmosphere, and spoke. "Sir, is there anything wrong with intercepting us? Roland glanced at the vigilant knights behind him and said calmly. I think a white knight should not come to wrongly accuse a small mage like me. 2 4th level, 13 3rd level, 31 2nd level, 10 1st level. Although it is not difficult to kill them all, this force is a considerable force in any knight group. Someone will definitely come to investigate. Maybe he can extract the soul and flip through the memory, follow the memory to find the whole knight group. Although he said it humbly, Roland has begun to think about how to follow their interpersonal relationships and destroy their hometown if the other side provokes trouble. Opposite Roland, the white knight also dismounted silently, politely saluted Roland, and said. Ito, officer of the glowing knights. Hello, unknown spellcaster, we are here for the Death Knight behind you. He is an enemy of the Pantheon. I am very happy to see him die in your hands. Looking at the polite white knight, Roland also knew that he probably would not fight with them. The glowing knights, full name, Pantheon and Dawn Temple, a poor knights who spread hope and glory, is generally referred to as the glowing knights, or the glowing knights. Because glowing means glory, brightness, honor, and splendor, which is more in line with the doctrine of the knights generally call themselves the glowing knights. This is a knight group that even Roland has heard of. Because the glowing knights are the first religious knights to officially announce their separation from the Pantheon after the religious reform of Sinner. Although after he announced his separation, a large number of principalities, kingdoms, monasteries, and knights also announced their abandonment of the Pantheon faith, the Radiant Knights, as the first political and military entity to announce it, are still quite famous. Basically, whenever the religious reform is mentioned, the name of the Radiant Knights will inevitably appear. However, the current Radiant Knights should still be loyal to the Pantheon faith, right? Roland thought while politely returning the greeting with the etiquette of a spellcaster. I wonder if you can help me deal with this corpse. Although Roland didn't know much about the knights, he had encountered such a team chasing the enemy in his previous life, so he knew it well. If they wanted to keep the corpse, they could use the image stone to confirm that the person was really dead. If they didn't care much about the corpse, they could also give them a head. Of course, the best option was to hand over the whole corpse directly. Roland was not interested in the corpse of a 4th level knight. After discussing with Hela did not intend to collect the corpse as material for the new undead. He originally planned to throw it here directly. In this case, it would be better to send it directly to the other side. After hearing Roland's hint that he was willing to hand over the corpse to him, the white knight smiled and said. Thank you for your understanding. After that, the white knight made a few gestures to the other knights on the side, asking them to bypass Roland and Hela to confirm the identity of the corpse and prepare to take the corpse back. Later, when the knight confirmed the identity, the white knight also took the initiative to communicate with Roland to delay time. Roland naturally knew their little tricks, but he did not want to cause trouble, so he chose to cooperate with the white knight tacitly. After seeing the knight who was examining the body nodded to him, the white knight also smiled and looked at Roland. He took out a special badge from his arms, handed it to Roland, and said. You are going to Ginza, right? This is the badge of our knights. If it's convenient, please go to the Pantheon to receive the reward. Roland did not refuse and took the badge. Although Roland is very rich now, he would rather take the reward for free. After Roland accepted the badge, the white knight also said goodbye to Roland for the last time, and then left in a hurry with the team and the corpse. After seeing off the white knight, Roland and Hela did not waste time and continued to move forward on the pack horse. Roland looked at the crown of domination in his hand, sensing its situation thoughtfully. After fusing this free fragment, Roland almost had 2/5 of the crown of domination. Compared with the fragment drained by the Lich King, the fragment sent by the knight was in much better condition. Except for a little energy just extracted by the knight, there was no other loss. Moreover, this fragment also carried a new legendary spell, Serving Skeletons. This powerful spell was probably the Lich King's reliance on controlling hundreds of millions of undead, and it was also one of his core spells for the undead disaster. However, it was of no value to Roland. Although he knew necromancy, he was unlikely to rub too many undead without fighting. After all, Roland was not a necromancer specializing in undead. As a full system spellcaster, undead were not worth Roland's time to create. Although the skeleton commandment spell was somewhat useful to Hela was still only a 4th level spellcaster, and it was too early for her to learn legendary spells. When Hela became a high-level spellcaster, Roland might let her learn the legendary spells on the Crown of Domination. Chapter 142. Ginza. The capital of the Silver Empire, the city of world desire, the brightest pearl of Sinur, and one of the two most prosperous cities in the history of human civilization. This is a city praised by countless people. No matter who it is, even if they are tired of hearing the praises and have made all kinds of preparations in advance, as long as they come to this city for the first time, they will be shocked by the prosperity and glory of this city. As a product of the most powerful and prosperous period of the Silver Empire during the reign of Littorio, the birth of Ginza was a huge city forged by a legendary spellcaster leading thousands of spellcasters, using the unlimited support of the entire Silver Empire and countless precious extraordinary materials. This is a miracle city that can hardly be replicated even if Littorio is resurrected, takes over the power again, and rules the Silver Empire again. Even after the division of the Silver Empire, the bloody civil war, and the changes and turmoil of all sizes, this city that has been settled for thousands of years still looks bright and beautiful. Especially after the collapse of the Central Kingdom in the Green Tide and the only city that can be compared with it lost contact, Ginza also confirmed its position as the most prosperous city of mankind. During Littorio's reign, he swept through Sinur, and the large amount of mithril he mined, collected and plundered was also melted into a mithril throne symbolizing wisdom and power by his legendary magic. The throne, named Silver Throne, is located on the central palace of this city. Almost every Silver Emperor will maintain and command this huge empire on the Silver Throne. Standing under the tall walls of the Silver Throne, Hela pulled the packhorse with her left hand, raised her head slightly, looked at the tall city in front of her, and showed a trace of amazement. The outermost huge walls are made of the most top-notch ordinary materials, mixed with a large amount of extraordinary metals, and enchanted with extremely complex runes, forming a huge rune model. Although the runes are looming and difficult to see clearly, Hela can also perceive the amazing scale and power of this rune array just by appearance. Hela has followed Roland to many places, and in this world, she is also well informed. She originally thought that Ginza would be like Blue Glory or Black Domain at most, but with this outer wall, it has surpassed all the school cities Hela has seen in the Tower of Truth. It's really exaggerated. Looking at the city wall that seemed to be shining in front of her, Hela was also a little emotional. In addition to Hela, outside of Ginza, most ordinary people who came for the first time or came several times but were not used to it, and the extraordinary people were looking at this huge city with amazement in their eyes. Not far away from them, the residents who were used to the beauty of Ginza raised their heads and chests, showing proud expressions. Even the poorest patriots in Ginza would involuntarily straighten their chests when they thought of Ginza's wealth and prosperity. However, although Hela was surprised, Roland, who had seen big scenes, naturally had no feelings. In Roland's view, Ginza was no different from the school city of the Tower of Truth, except that it was a little larger in scale. In the final analysis, it was just a feudal city with a bit of fantasy. It felt inferior to the Sky City. Although Hela was indeed shocked by Ginza, she was a 4th-level spellcaster after all, and she had also seen the resources piled up after Roland harvested several ruins, so Hela recovered the fastest. She glanced at Ginza again, and then followed Roland into Ginza along the crowd. With the spellcaster badge, the two easily passed the inspection for entering the city, and then, after passing through the long city gate, they finally officially entered this prosperous city. When the sun shone on the two again, a group of white pigeons just flew past them. With the sound of flapping wings, Hela subconsciously closed her eyes slightly. After the white pigeons flew past, she opened her eyes. A neighborhood that perfectly met almost all of Hela's imaginations appeared in front of her. The ancient streets were wide and flat, with neatly paved floors. People were coming and going, bustling and bustling. There were bustling shops on both sides of the street, with a wide variety of goods filling the windows. The bright colors were dazzling. There were bursts of laughter and piano music coming from the roadside taverns, and guests gathered together to drink and chat. Residents came and went in colorful clothes with smiles on their faces. Children ran and played on the streets, enjoying the sunshine and freedom to their heart's content. It was very lively. The ancient streets witnessed this peace and prosperity. Peaceful and peaceful, prosperous and prosperous, this was Hela's first impression. It was perfect and a little fake. Hela silently observed the passers-by wearing colorful clothes, as well as the various expressions and body languages they exposed. Although she couldn't see any problems, she still felt that everything in front of her had an indescribable sense of disobedience. She followed Roland, frowning and thinking. However, until Roland booked a room and the two of them rested in the room, she couldn't figure out the source of the sense of disharmony. After Roland cleaned up the room and set up a small magic circle of a warning nature, he also sat opposite Hela, looked at Hela who was in deep thought, and asked. You have been like this since entering the city. What are you thinking about? Hearing Roland's words, Hela also looked up at him and told Roland what she saw and felt since entering the city. A sense of disharmony. Roland smiled, opened a Ginza city map that he had bought on the way upstairs, put it on the table, and said. Maybe this can solve your doubts. Hearing Roland's words, Hela looked at the map on the table curiously. At the same time, Roland pointed to an edge of the map and said. We came in from this side. Looking at the densely packed city divisions on the map, Hela frowned thoughtfully, and her fingers followed the roads on the map through the intricate city districts. She bit her lip, combined with the structure of the map, and recalled what she had seen along the way. What's the problem? Hela felt that she seemed to have missed a key condition. Hint, don't add the common sense of the Tower of Truth to Ginza. Seeing that Hela still couldn't think of it, Roland also gave a hint. Hela looked up at Roland in confusion. Common sense of the Tower of Truth? A flash of inspiration flashed through Hela's mind, and she quickly looked down at the map. Compared with the school city, Ginza is very different in one aspect. The school city never hides the existence of extraordinary power, and many repetitive daily maintenance of the city is handled by puppets. Ginza does not have such an open atmosphere, and many advanced technologies are not widely used. At least, Hela did not see puppets responsible for daily maintenance of the city on the streets. Based on the population density she just saw along the way, combined with the number of districts in the city, the population of Ginza may be in the millions. If there were no puppets, the number of workers needed to maintain Ginza's daily life would definitely not be a small number. Even in Ginza, Hela did not believe that these high-ranking nobles would offer so many workers high salaries. And what Hela saw along the way were all bright and colorful guys, so what about these workers? Chapter 143. Even in a world with extraordinary powers, Ginza's huge area and astonishing population are a huge challenge for daily maintenance and management. Moreover, the astonishing population also means that Ginza needs to consume a large amount of materials and produce a huge amount of garbage every day. This means that Ginza needs a lot of ordinary workers to take on these affairs. Although the large group of ordinary workers is an important part of maintaining Ginza, in order to prevent them from becoming a stain on the bright pearl of Ginza, they can only live in the fixed urban areas assigned to them. Even if they are responsible for daily maintenance, workers who need to go to other urban areas cannot appear on the streets and can only go to the workplace through narrow and complex sewers. They are strictly prohibited from appearing in any public places. Once they violate the rules, they may be directly executed by the city defense army for polluting the city appearance. And the urban area where they are located, the East District, has also become the dirtiest and poorest urban area in Ginza. However, under the blockade of the Silver Empire, the East District has not affected the prosperity and glory of Ginza at all. Unless they look for it deliberately, outsiders will generally be obsessed with the prosperous and glorious surface of Ginza, and will not see the dirty and poor East District. They will leave with infinite praise for Ginza. However, Hela, who was born in the tribes of the Northland, will not. Although she has become a 4th-level spellcaster with Roland, Hela has not forgotten her poor origins. She will not be deceived by the false appearance on the surface. In the East District, Roland and Hela, who changed into worn-out clothes and disguised their whole bodies, walked silently on the street. Compared with other clean and tidy districts, the East District is full of dirt and chaos, and countless disgusting smells are intertwined with each other, forming a disgusting smell that is difficult to describe in words. As the garbage bin of Ginza, the garbage produced in other districts is piled up here, and the piles of garbage piled up into mountains can be seen almost every distance. Colorful sewage flows freely on the old road surface, and the sheds built illegally are intertwined with the ancient buildings that may have a history of thousands of years, depicting a grotesque picture. The residents of the East District were not as calm as those of other district residents. They were all running around in a hurry. Ginza was not kind to ordinary workers. In order to ensure the normal operation of Ginza and reduce maintenance costs, ordinary workers generally worked for more than 10 or even 12 hours, basically from the time they opened their eyes in the morning until the sun set. Moreover, their wages were very low. Under the careful calculation of the caster, they could only maintain a level that would not starve to death. They could not save money. Once they stopped working, they would starve, and their physical strength would decrease. If their physical strength decreased, they would not be able to do their work well. If they did not do their work well, they would be fired, and firing meant death. Roland and Hela, who were walking slowly on the street, seemed so out of tune. Looking at the miserable world in front of her, Hela's eyes were a little reluctant. She lowered her head slightly and subconsciously held Roland's hand tightly. Hela thought what she saw was miserable enough, but she soon found that she was too naive. As the two went deeper, a completely discolored river appeared in front of them. Various garbage, wastewater and corpses polluted the entire river. In addition to various domestic and industrial wastewater, Hela, who had learned alchemy, also noticed a large amount of alchemical wastewater. These alchemical wastewaters reacted strangely with the messy components of the river, causing the river to glow and constantly radiate weak fluctuations around. As the core and absolute heart of the Silver Empire, after years of development, the total population of Ginza has long exceeded the upper limit that the entire city can bear, especially since the scale of the city has not expanded for many years. The result is that some people really can't even find a place to sleep. It's good to be able to live in a shed. Some broken bridge holes, garbage dumps, stinking ditches, and sewers are full of people. Some people are even worse. They don't even have these places, so they can only find another way to live on the river. In the river polluted by alchemical wastewater, a worker who is only about 1.6 meters tall is curled up on a piece of wood that is only about 3 or 4 meters long and has a hole of less than 1 meter in the middle. In order to avoid being washed away by the river, this piece of driftwood was tied up with a rusty iron chain and nailed to the river bank. But even so, the driftwood would still drift with the river, looking very unreliable. Moreover, he was not the only one who did this. Hela looked around and saw that there were relatively many similar houses floating on the river. Those with driftwood were already considered to be in good condition. Some of the poorer conditions could even use a piece of wood and tie some materials around it to increase buoyancy. There were also several tattered corpses piled up next to some unmanned houses. In addition, although the weak fluctuations of the river were quite weak, if it was an ordinary person, the flesh would be easily infected and deformed. Therefore, Hela looked around and saw that the ordinary people living in these houses basically had more or less deformation inside their flesh. Moreover, in addition to these ordinary people living in the river houses, Hela also saw some people holding bowls or wooden buckets to fetch water in this heavily polluted river. Hela looked upstream of the river. Her sight penetrated through layers of concealment and saw the clean and clear upstream. Upstream, there were transport ships and sightseeing boats coming and going. Many glamorous gentlemen and ladies were dancing on the decks of the sightseeing boats with laughter and melodious music. The jealous knights were fighting duels like a child's play. The spellcasters were playing with the elements in a mysterious way under the envious eyes of others. On the boats, the servants poured the slightly cool, slightly warm, and uneaten exquisite and luxurious food into the river one by one, and replaced it with new food. Occasionally, the people on the boats would turn their heads to admire the clean and clear river, or the countless scenic spots in Ginza, while the common people struggling to survive were excluded from their vision by the spell. It was just a magic circle that separated them. One side was like heaven, and the other side was like hell. Looking at everything in front of her, Hela's first good impression of Ginza collapsed in an instant, and turned into deep disgust. The splendor of Ginza was built on countless bloody oppressions. Looking at those guys from the upper class, Hela clenched her fists. Ever since she killed all the cultists and left the north, she once again had the intention to kill. Chapter 144. Although Hela had a strong desire to kill them all, she still kept her mind. Roland was still there, she couldn't cause trouble, otherwise, she would drag Roland down. Hela closed her eyes, took a few deep breaths, and suppressed her urge to kill. Then, she looked at Roland on the side. On the surface, Roland was not as angry as Hela, he just looked at the polluted river quietly. Just when Hela was about to open her mouth and propose to leave, her perception flashed a little intuition, so she subconsciously followed her intuition, expanded her perception, and captured a pair of boys and girls in a hidden place beside the river. In the hidden area wrapped in the garbage dump, the two whispered something. Then, the boy hugged the girl. After hugging for a while, the girl gently pushed the boy away, her lips moved, and after saying a few words, she took off all her clothes, folded them and handed them to the boy, and walked naked towards the polluted river. The boy held the clothes, looked at the girl's back, tears in his eyes, bit his lower lip tightly, and did not make any sound. In Hela's perception, she sensed the girl's strong fear and determination, the boy's near collapse and numb despair. Hela bit her lip and glanced at Roland. "Go if you want to." Roland looked at the polluted river and said calmly. After getting Roland's reply, Hella disappeared beside Roland in an instant. Roland looked at the river in front of him and closed his eyes silently. Although he had been prepared, the lower limit of this era could exceed Roland's imagination every time. It was really disgusting. Anna stood by the river, looking down at the river that was glowing slightly because of pollution. She intertwined her hands, closed her eyes and prayed devoutly. "Oh Lord!" Anna suddenly opened her eyes again. "Forget about praying before death. If you commit suicide, you can't go to heaven." Besides, since her father and mother died on the battlefield, she seldom prayed, and her faith was not as devout as before. Anna looked at the river silently, her heart was filled with fear of death and reluctance to leave her relatives. But, she didn't hesitate for long, because she knew that every second she hesitated, she would hurt the people behind her. Thinking of this, she closed her eyes and took her first step calmly towards the river. She didn't feel the expected disappointment, on the contrary, she stepped on the solid soil. Is it too scared, and the step is too small? Thinking so, Anna closed her eyes and took another big step. "Can you tell me? Why do you want to commit suicide?" Just as Anna took the second step, a gentle voice sounded in Anna's ears. Hearing the voice in her ear, Anna was a little surprised and opened her eyes carefully. Then she saw a girl who made her feel very kind. Anna looked at her, and inexplicably felt an urge to tell her everything. So, she did it. "To save money, I got sick, and my family has no money to continue treatment." Listening to Anna's words, the girl pursed her lips, and after a moment of silence, she continued to ask. "Did your family ask you to come?" Anna shook her head and said. "No, I proposed it myself, and there is still at home." As she spoke, Anna suddenly stopped, closed her mouth silently, lowered her head, and dared not look at Hella again. Looking at Anna who suddenly broke free from the charm, Hella was a little surprised. An ordinary person can break free from the influence of the first ring spell by his own will. Although Anna should not be able to withstand the second ring spell. Hella took out a windbreaker from the space bracelet and put it on Anna's naked body. Then, she stretched out her hand and gently pressed it on her head. First level spell purification. A gentle light emerged from Hella's hand and quickly purified the distortion all over her body. As the light was injected, Anna also felt the long-lost warmth. At the same time, as the distortion in her body was purified, her weak body slowly recovered. When Hella took back her hand, Anna looked at her hands with surprise. "Am I okay?" Feeling relaxed, Anna looked at Hella in awe. "Now, can you tell me about your story? I have no ill will towards you." Hella smiled friendly and asked gently. Anna bit her lip and was still a little hesitant, but she finally chose to speak. As an ordinary family, how could they have the capital to defy a superhuman, and many people knew about her family's situation. As long as they were determined to investigate, they would definitely not be able to hide it. Then, a simple story was told in her mouth. The story was actually not complicated, and it could even be said to be mediocre. Anna's family originally lived in other districts of Ginza. Her father was a blacksmith and her mother was a low-level clergyman in a small temple. Although this family environment was not very good in Ginza, it was not particularly bad either. At least, it was enough to support a family in an ordinary district. Until the Rose War, the largest civil war in the Silver Empire in hundreds of years, destroyed this small family. Anna's father and mother were forcibly conscripted into the army, and then, within less than a year, they died in battle one after another. There was not even a corpse. The only proof was a cold notice filled with the identities of countless dead. After losing the protection of her parents, Anna's family naturally could not stay in the ordinary urban area, and had to be forced to move to the poor East District. Anna's family has 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls. Anna is the second child, with an older brother and 2 younger sisters. In order to survive, she and her brother, who are relatively older, began to work to earn money. However, suffering did not let them go. Anna was infected because she came to the river to fetch water every day before she worked for a long time. Although the infection in the East District is not a terminal illness, it can still be saved if there is money, but how can a teenager save money for treatment while supporting 4 people in the family? Moreover, his income from work is not high, and the family's normal income is largely from the monthly subsidy from the Silver Empire to the families of fallen soldiers. Listening to Anna's words, Hella looked at Anna calmly and said, "Military family subsidies, not enough." Hearing Hella's words, Anna's face became more and more sad. She whispered, "Originally, it might have been enough. Originally. Hela frowned slightly. Over the years, due to insufficient national finances, subsidies have been reduced 7 times. Anna closed her eyes and whispered. My sisters still have to study, they still have a future, I don't want them to live in the East District forever, and my brother is also very tired. Since I got sick, he hasn't had a good meal or a good night's sleep for a long time. I don't want to be a burden to them. I remember that the family subsidies are issued according to the number of people. Yet. Anna nodded slightly and said with her head down. With the cover of clothes and neighbors, I should be able to cheat for a few more years of subsidies. If I don't need to treat my illness, 3 people will get 4 people's subsidies, which should make my brother feel a little relieved. Chapter 145. Although she was talking about her past, Anna's heart was not very disturbed. On the contrary, she was calm, or numb and sober. However, she was awake, but Hela was a little annoyed inside. What kind of stupid country, soldiers died fighting for the country, and future generations will end up like this. You have money to hold a banquet, but you don't have money to pay subsidies, right? Hela pursed her lips, emptied the money bag filled with gold coins in the space bracelet, and then put the copper coins piled aside into it. Then, she took out the money bag, grabbed Anna's hand with her left hand, put the money bag in her hand with her right hand, and said. Here's some money, let's use it. Anna held the money bag and whispered. Thanks. Regardless of whether Hela had any malicious intentions or not, she did not have the capital to refuse. Hela sighed, took a step back, and disappeared. As Hela disappeared, so did the magic she used to hide traces. The boy standing next to the garbage dump also saw Anna wearing a windbreaker and holding a small bag in her hand. He ran over quickly. Standing in front of the polluted river, Hela stood beside Roland in a somewhat depressed mood. If you have anything to say, just say it, don't keep it in your heart. Roland said lightly. What I just did, does it make sense? Hela lowered her head, looking at the corpses floating in front of her on the polluted river, and whispered. I can only help them temporarily, but not forever. Moreover, I can't help many people. I can't change anything. As he spoke, Hela glanced around, and what came into view was countless struggling hard-working people, as well as extremely heavy and suppressed negative energy. She is just a 4th-level spellcaster and cannot change the situation in the entire East District. This is the will of all the ruling classes in Ginza. The prosperity and glory of Ginza do not come without a price, and the East District is a necessary sacrifice. Not to mention Hela, even Roland now can't even think of changing everything by himself. Unless Roland can crush the legends now, attack directly from the outskirts of Ginza in front of the Silver Throne, kill the legendary old antiques of the Silver Empire, use absolute violence to force them to give up their interests, and change everything in the East District. Roland touched her head and whispered. It's not your fault. At least you just saved a life. Hela raised her head, looked at Roland, and opened her mouth, wanting to say something. When she hesitated, she remembered what Roland had taught her before. The mouth is on the body and is used for talking. She doesn't say anything, so how does she know it won't work? Thinking of this, Hela asked. Is there any way to help them? Roland was silent for a while, looked at Hela, and asked. You want to help them? Why? You should know that this kind of thing is not just an exception in this world. Even if you are a legend, you can't save everyone. Hela met Roland's cold eyes and said firmly. This is what you taught me. Don't neglect doing good deeds because they are small. If you can save one person, then one is one. Shouldn't it be treated like this just because you can't save everyone? Looking at the determined Hela in front of him, Roland's tone was a little cold. So, what are you willing to do for this? Hela was also a little frustrated when she heard Roland's cold words. Everything she had now was given by Roland, so there was nothing she could give. Are you willing to use all your cultivation resources for the next year to save them? Roland's cold words reached Hela's ears. Hearing Roland's words, Hela quickly raised her head and looked at him. Roland, who felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by Hela, said with a straight face. Just tell me if you want to, why are you watching me? I do. Hela nodded and responded. After Hela nodded, Roland also turned around and looked at the polluted river in front of him. Then, he stretched out his right hand. Third ring spell wide area purification. Countless light spots that were difficult for ordinary people to detect poured out of Roland's hands and flew around. As the light points fell into the river and the surrounding civilians, the pollution and influence caused by the alchemical wastewater quickly disappeared under the power of purification. Then, Roland turned around and walked down the river, and Hela followed behind Roland, releasing purification spells in a decent manner. The two of them first thoroughly purified the entire river, the largest channel for the spread of pollution. While erasing the pollution from the alchemical wastewater, they also briefly purified the river. At the same time, Roland also spent some effort on every step. Temporary purification arrays were installed at the drainage outlets that discharged alchemical wastewater. After completing the purification of the river, Roland and Hela also walked silently on the vast East District, covering every corner of the East District with purified light spots. Whether it was the boron room on the ground or the dark corners of the sewer, Roland and Hela walked through it all. It took them several days to complete the purification of the entire East District. After completing the purification of the East District, Roland and Hela did not rest. They changed out of their smelly plain clothes, left the East District, and went to the neighboring East District. It was not as prosperous as Ginza on the surface, nor was it reduced to rubbish like the East District. DUI, an ordinary southeastern district like other cities in the Silver Empire. Roland had a clear goal and wasted no time. He walked directly through the complicated neighborhoods and arrived at a clean and tidy parish. The parish in front of him was not as luxurious as the Ginza Central Cathedral, and the building materials used were the same as those of the surrounding houses, all of which were ordinary and had no special materials. The only difference was that the buildings in the parish were not so crowded, and they were all well maintained, and the environment was particularly clean. Combined with various clean and simple religious buildings, as well as the quiet priests and believers coming and going, it gave people a sense of long history, solemnity, and sacredness. Roland glanced at the symbols carved at the entrance of the parish. The Temple of the Pantheon and the Dawn, a poor knight group that spreads hope and glory. This ordinary parish is the headquarters of the Glorious Knights in Ginza. As a knight group named after poverty, the Glorious Knights were indeed very poor at the beginning of their establishment, but due to their devout faith and strong combat effectiveness, the Glorious Knights were valued by the Pantheon. After discussions and rulings within the Pantheon, the status of the Glorious Knights was officially confirmed. Relying on the various privileges of the religious knights, including tax exemption and free travel, as well as the gifts from the nobles and the wisdom of the knights within the knights, the Radiant Knights quickly became wealthy. However, although they became wealthy, the Radiant Knights still abided by the precepts. In addition to maintaining the normal operation and expansion of the knights, most of the money they obtained was invested in charity. Even the headquarters was not made very glamorous. They are the knights with the largest number of orphanages and relief homes among all religious knights. Chapter 146. In the polytheistic faith of the Pantheon, the Radiant Knights, who believe in Lady Dawn and spread hope and light according to the doctrine, still pay more attention to ordinary people. It is better than those who support war, expansion, and the law of the jungle. However, the Radiant Knights are just a knight order after all. Although they enjoy various privileges, they are subject to the necessary constraints, and no matter how rich they are, they cannot save everyone. Roland and Hela followed the flow of people and walked into the parish calmly. However, after entering the parish, Roland did not follow the flow of people to the cathedral in the middle. Instead, he directly left the flow of people and walked towards the other side, where the sound of weapons colliding was heard. Bang! 2 guards blocked Roland's way. One of the guards looked at Roland, then at Hela, and said, "Mr. and Madam, if you need to pray, please go to the church. This is the office area of the knights and is not open to the public." Roland took out the badge that the White Knight had given him before and handed it to the guard. The guard took a look at the badge, took out a piece of paper from his pocket, and after comparing it for a few times, he returned the badge to Roland and said, "Please come in, Officer Ito is in the administrative area on the left." The guards made way and let Roland and Hela in. After entering the area surrounded by the wall, Roland saw a group of knights and servants who were training and learning close combat in the open space. Several tall formal knights walked around in the knights and servants, correcting the postures of the knights and servants from time to time. And next to the knights and servants, in a relatively small church, there was another group of knights and servants who took off their training armor, wore church robes and sat cross-legged on the spot, learning with a special breathing frequency as if mobilizing and controlling positive energy. Roland glanced at it. It was just some basic knight training, nothing to see. So, under the curious eyes of some knights and servants, Roland and Hela walked into a large building on the left. After explaining their purpose to the priest in charge of administrative affairs, Roland and Hela were taken to a room. Hela sat on the sofa, turned her head, looked at the knights in attendance on the training ground through the window, turned her head and looked at Roland again, and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Looking for a backer." After Roland responded casually, he paused and explained, "I won't stay in Ginza for long. Besides, we don't have any connections or power in Ginza. If we want to improve the situation in the East District, in addition to the improvement plan, it is more important to get the support of local forces. The Radiant Knights are a good choice. They have tried to improve the living conditions in the East District before, but although they successfully interfered, they had no plan and preparation. Even if they moved their headquarters, they only pulled this area out of the East District. Moreover, according to the information collected, the Radiant Knights have not given up their activities in the East District over the years. It's just that due to the influence of the Rose War, they have not had much energy to assist the East District in recent years. If we can convince them to support us, many things will not be so troublesome. As long as the plan can be implemented smoothly, even if it cannot completely change the East District, it can still improve the living environment in the East District." As Roland finished speaking, a man pushed the door and walked in. "If your plan can really improve the East District, we will support it." Ito, wearing a church robe, walked in and said to Roland. Then he sat opposite Roland. Roland looked at Ito, smiled slightly, took out a manuscript from the space bracelet, put it on the table, and said, "This is my sincerity." Ito picked up the manuscript handed over by Roland, glanced at it, and his expression suddenly became serious. He flipped through it and said, "This is the technical version of the simple purification technique." Roland said lightly. In this undeveloped era, compared with the spellcasters who formed the Tower of Truth, the development speed of scattered knights is naturally slower. Of course, Donner, known as the hometown of knights, is still better than here. And because the current knight skills are all focused on fighting and killing, the techniques are basically how to efficiently use elements to cause destruction and kill people, and there are very few functional techniques. Even the Radiant Knights, who mainly practice positive energy, do not have many functional techniques. Therefore, their way of treatment is to inject positive energy without thinking and let the positive energy play freely. Although this method works well between knights, it is not very effective for ordinary people. Knights can also actively absorb positive energy to heal themselves, but ordinary people don't know these things. If they directly inject positive energy, they will basically die. Although the positive energy of knights is milder than that of other knights, as weapons, they are still sharp and powerful. Ordinary people can't stand this kind of positive energy. What Roland gave was to transform the spell model of purification into a technique that knights can master based on the traditional night breathing method. This is not that Roland copied the memory of his previous life, but he thought it out by himself when he was walking in the East District to spread purification. After all, although he had learned some techniques in his previous life, Roland had not learned most of the functional techniques that could achieve similar effects. After hearing Roland's words, Ito looked at Roland with a serious expression, and then returned his eyes to the manuscript. After flipping through it several times, he stretched out his empty left hand and tried to replicate it according to the foolproof tutorial on the manuscript. Under his surprised gaze, a faint and gentle light appeared on his hand. This light was completely different from the positive energy he output during his usual practice and battle. It felt tough and powerful. Although the speed of the display was a bit slow, considering that it was also the first time that Ito performed a functional technique, it was reasonable. Looking at the light on his hand, Ito did not hesitate and slapped it directly on himself, closed his eyes, and carefully felt its effect. The gentle light then began to purify his body. Although this purification ability, for a 4th level knight, is not as good as the self-repair of his body after sublimation. However, considering that they used to directly inject positive energy to heal teammates, the cost-effectiveness of purification is much higher, and this mild purification can also be used to save ordinary people. It actually works. Ito opened his eyes, his tone full of surprise. Chapter 147. As the title says, there are 3 consecutive days of lab classes from 8 am to 8 pm. On the 4th day after the 3 days of lab, there is another half-day lab in the morning, and there is a final exam in the afternoon. So, these 4 days will be busy, and there will be no time to write. It may not be possible to write every day, so I will take 2 days off first. If the 4 days are very busy and I can't squeeze out time, I may have to give up the full attendance next month and take 2 more days off. Chapter 148. After confirming that the manuscript provided by Roland was authentic and valid, Ito's attitude towards Roland became more serious. After Roland briefly explained his general plan, Ito decisively recommended Roland to the current leader of the Knights. As a 6th-level knight who dared to make a big fuss in Ginza more than 30 years ago, the leader of the Knights directly decided to support Roland after listening to Roland's general plan. Later, at the invitation of the leader, Roland and Hela temporarily lived in the parish. The leader of the Huangguang Knights quickly formed a team specifically responsible for this plan, led by him personally. Relying on the rich historical records of the Huangguang Knights on the situation in the East District, combined with the current political situation in Ginza, he kept communicating with Roland, adjusting and modifying and constantly refining the implementation plan. As for Hela, Roland sent her to teach the Knights of the Huangguang Knights how to perform purification. Hela is still quite talented in positive energy. Although she is not as talented as in dark elements, she is also a genius. Moreover, Hela was not a traditional spellcaster of Signer, and her training in Knights was not bad either. Therefore, Hela could easily master the technical version of purification, so Roland asked Hela to teach the Knights of the Radiant Light Knights. In addition, under the order of the Knights leader, some administrative personnel of the Knights leader were also transferred out, leaving the headquarters, running around, handling and doing various trivial matters. At the same time, the Knights mobilized from the branches also rushed over one by one and gathered at the headquarters. Although all the forces in Ginza noticed the small actions of the Radiant Light Knights, due to the gag order issued by the leader of the Radiant Light Knights, they did not get any useful information. They only knew that the Radiant Light Knights were going to take action again, but no one knew what they were going to do. Therefore, they could only send people to guard outside the parish, ready to see what big news the Radiant Light Knights were going to make. After the spies outside the parish waited for more than 10 days, the Radiant Light Knights, who had made various preparations, officially began to act. Under the watchful eyes of outside spies, the Knights station, which had been sealed for more than 10 days, suddenly opened its gates. Knights and knight attendants filed out one after another, forming small teams and running in an orderly manner towards the East District. Looking at the direction they were running, a scout of a faction quickly opened a detailed map of Ginza. Is this direction the East District? What are they going to do? Isn't the lesson from more than 30 years ago enough? The scout of the faction was a little confused. Back then, that 6th-level knight almost turned the whole Ginza upside down. What was he going to do this time? Would he make trouble again? He quickly picked up the magic tool beside him and passed the message to his superior. Similar situations were happening everywhere, and all the spies of the faction who reacted passed the message to the faction behind them. Oh no, the old leader of the Radiant Knights was going to go crazy again. When they sent the message, some sharp-eyed spies of the faction saw Roland and Hela coming out of the station again. Who are these two people? Looking at Roland and Hela, the spies of the forces also uploaded the news of Roland and Hela to the forces behind them. Roland ignored the prying of these spies of the forces and rushed to the upper reaches of the polluted river in the East District with Hela and dozens of accompanying knights. After entering the East District, the knights quickly divided into countless teams and quickly dispersed according to the responsible areas divided in advance. Then, countless gentle lights flashed on their hands. While rescuing every civilian they met, they also spread the faith of Lady Dawn to them according to the plan. As for Roland, after arriving in the upper district, he naturally attracted the attention of most people with several fully armed knights. As a prosperous upper city district, Roland's situation naturally quickly attracted the city defense army. Before Roland took a few steps in the upper city district, a city defense army stopped in front of Roland. However, the attitude of the city defense army was very humble. After all, those who dared to be so arrogant in the upper city district of Ginza, like Roland, either had a strong background or were pure fools, and generally speaking, the former was more common. The captain of the city defense army looked at Roland cautiously and asked in a low voice. "Sir." Before he could finish his words, Roland raised a certificate of the tribunal and said, "Tribunal business." Seeing the certificate in Roland's hand, the captain of the city defense army did not dare to say a word and quickly made way. Then, under the curious gaze of countless people, Roland led the team into the workshop area of the upper city. Because he had inquired about the news in advance, Roland did not hesitate when he arrived at the workshop area and ran straight to the target workshop. After Roland approached, more than a dozen guards in front of the workshop door quickly stopped in front of Roland. Take him down. Without waiting for the guards to say anything, Roland gave the order directly. After receiving the order, a knight beside him also rushed up directly, knocked all the guards to the ground in a few seconds, and threw them all together. Then, Roland walked to the closed door of the alchemy workshop. He knocked on the door politely and shouted, "Open the door, check the water meter." After waiting for 2 seconds and receiving no response, Roland looked at the alchemy door. After sensing several life forms behind the door, he raised his leg and kicked the door. "Open the door." Tribunal. Bang. The solid alchemy door was kicked away by Roland. After the door was kicked open, all the knights behind him quickly rushed in from both sides of Roland. "The Inquisition is doing business. Everyone, put down all your work immediately." The knights scolded with words, and at the same time, they also used force to fight against every guy who tried to resist or destroy evidence. However, the Pantheon's Inquisition was well known. After hearing the voice, most members of the alchemy workshop decisively gave up resistance, raised their hands honestly, and squatted on the ground. While the knights controlled this huge alchemy workshop, Roland also took Hela directly to the connection between this alchemy workshop and the river. Roland saw several spellcasters busy by the river from a distance. Without any hesitation, Roland directly gave each spellcaster a 4th level mind shock, knocking them all to the ground. Then, Roland saw a channel that was half closed, but was still continuously discharging various alchemy wastewater directly into the river. Some things, although they are implicit rules, if someone wants to overturn the table and use the explicit rules to deal with them, the implicit rules will not protect them. More than 30 years ago, the leader of the Radiant Knights could deal with them in this way, and now, he can still do it. Moreover, with the experience of the last time and Roland's advice, the one who came to cause trouble this time was not the Radiant Knights who had no law enforcement power, but the Pantheon Inquisition, which had law enforcement and trial power. Chapter 149. Roland was able to come in the name of the tribunal because the leader of the Radiant Knights personally visited the tribunal in Ginza, and quietly applied for it through connections and procedures. After all, Lady Dawn is also one of the main gods of the Pantheon. In the Pantheon, which department does not have followers of Lady Dawn? Even the tribunal is the same. It can still be approved by finding connections. Roland squatted down and stretched out his right hand towards the channel that continuously discharged alchemical wastewater. Powerful magic power surged from Roland's hand, wrapped around the channel, and continued to spread inward. Following the complex underground passages of the internal alchemy workshops, Roland locked onto one alchemy workshop after another that discharged wastewater wantonly. In less than 10 minutes, Roland identified all the alchemy workshops in the workshop area that illegally discharged wastewater. Only less than 10 workshops did not violate the law. The rest were basically illegally discharging through this largest channel. No, a purification array that costs less than 100 gold coins is so expensive for an alchemy workshop? Roland stood up with a dark face. At the same time, the real members of the tribunal also moved into the industrial area in batches. After Roland turned around and handed them the list of violations, the chief judge glanced at it, frowned, and then stopped looking. He turned his head and instructed the members beside him. "Surround the entire workshop area. No one is allowed to leave without my order." Then, the chief judge looked at Roland again and said, "I'll trouble you with the next thing." Roland nodded slightly and said, "I won't let them repeat what happened more than 30 years ago." After saying that, Roland walked into the nearest alchemy workshop with a cold face. Alchemy is a craft that pays special attention to inheritance and requires a lot of resources and time to practice. Compared with the Tower of Truth, the spellcasters who hold together to conduct school research, and the knights who develop in bulk and barbaric, alchemists are a small circle with extremely high thresholds and extremely exclusive, and they pay great attention to the inheritance of teachers and students, and the number of people rarely fluctuates. Therefore, under the monopoly of the small circle, alchemists are rarer than spellcasters. In addition, even if they are some wild alchemists, unless they are recommended by people in the circle, no matter how good their alchemy skills are, they will be rejected by the entire circle. In the case of a small circle controlling the right to interpret alchemy, if they are not accepted by the circle, it means that no matter how good their products are, they are just 3 no products, and they can only be sold privately on a small scale. Not only can they not make money, but they may also be attacked and arrested. If they are accepted by the circle, even if their products are garbage, have poor effects, or even have side effects, they can still be labeled and sold openly. Of course, This kind of small circle will only bully alchemists without background. Alchemists like the Silver family's own training, or alchemists who live in the Tower of Truth and have a school background, are too lazy to care about them. In short, under the habits of the small circle and mutual protection, no alchemist is willing to come out to help testify. In addition, the Radiant Knights have no law enforcement power and cannot forcibly block the workshop area all the time, giving alchemists the opportunity to disguise and clean up. Therefore, more than 30 years ago, the Radiant Light Knights could not legally take them down because they could not prove that the alchemical wastewater was harmful to the human body. But this time is different. Although Roland was not a particularly famous alchemist in his previous life, he could only drink the alchemical potions with amazing effects in the later stages of the game, but he also learned a little and could be considered a great alchemist. It was easy for him to extract the evidence from the alchemy workshop. As for how to prove the authenticity of the evidence and the harmfulness of various alchemical potions and alchemical wastewater, Roland also had a lot of ways. In addition, after the old leader mobilized his own connections, the attitude of the Mizdon faction within the tribunal was also quite resolute. With the order of the tribunal, they openly blocked the entire workshop area. Although the legal means were not effective back then, the Radiant Light Knights still took on a lot of pressure and destroyed and killed many alchemists. This time, with sufficient evidence, Roland and the old leader of the Glorious Knights are going to strike hard at the entire alchemist circle. When everything was going according to plan, the forces in Ginza that had interests in the alchemy workshop could not sit still. Can this alchemy workshop be shut down? Do you know how much money they will lose if they shut down for one day? After they received the news that Roland was coming to smash the place, almost all the interested forces were furious. Where did this guy come from? How dare he cut off our financial resources? Although the Inquisition is powerful, you, an unknown member of the Inquisition, dare to provoke us with a few knights? You are courting death. Just when they were planning to find a connection to let Roland know that Ginza is not a place where he can run wild at will, more and more news reached their ears. For example, the knights that Roland brought were all members of the Radiant Knights, and not long after Roland entered the workshop area, a tribunal brigade of several hundred people, led by the chief judge, blocked and controlled the entire workshop area. At the same time, the tribunal also issued a notice to combat the 3 evil potions and protect believers, openly and covertly pointing the spearhead at the alchemists and their alchemy workshops with chaotic management and messy products. In addition, the old leader of the Glorious Knights, wearing holy armor and holding holy spears, surrounded the headquarters of the alchemists with a group of elite knights. He blocked the door with murderous intent, forcing the alchemists to not dare to go out. Or maybe it was the news from the Tower of Truth that Roland was suspected to be a high-level spellcaster. After these news reached their ears, many forces calmed down all of a sudden, and the eyes of those who wanted to deal with Roland in anger suddenly became clear. This time, it was not just the Glorious Knights who were going to suffer, but also the Inquisition. Moreover, Roland, a high-level spellcaster, was not easy to deal with. There was no need to go against them for a little benefit of the workshop. Some forces that were not deeply involved in the workshop did not want to get involved in these things at all, and decisively abandoned their interests in the workshop and cleaned up some places that might be affected. However, the main stakeholders of the alchemy workshop and the alchemists did not give up so easily. For them, the alchemy workshop is a very important pillar of their industry. If it is gone, their income will be cut by a large amount. Moreover, even if they are willing to give up the interests of the alchemy workshop, the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition will not let them go. The former has tried to kill their entire family more than 30 years ago, and the latter, the Inquisition, has never been soft on their enemies, even if they surrender. Therefore, they can only bite the bullet and try to fight, hoping to have a good ending like more than 30 years ago. From 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., for 3 consecutive days, it's numb. Chapter 150. Although the Radiant Knights, the Inquisition, and Roland, who was suspected to be a high-level spellcaster, joined forces to strike hard at the alchemy workshop and the forces behind it, the commotion was not small. However, since Roland was currently operating everything legally and in compliance with regulations, the only problem was that the old leader led his men to surround the alchemists' headquarters. Therefore, most of the forces in Ginza were just watching the show. After all, the old leader did not rush in directly, but just stood at the door out of boredom. As for why he deliberately wore the holy armor and held the holy spear, that was his freedom as a 6th-level extraordinary person. Anyway, the old leader had no ill intentions. He did not say that the alchemists were not allowed to enter. It was they who did not want to enter, and it had nothing to do with the old leader. Of course, the alchemists also knew that if they entered and exited normally, the old leader would not be likely to attack them. However, considering that more than 30 years ago, when they were found not guilty, the old leader, who was furious, did not care about anything and rushed in directly, turning their celebration banquet into a feast. They didn't dare to bet that the old leader would get angry again, pick up the holy spear, shout justice, purification, and so on, and rush in to shoot them. However, the old leader's action was just a deterrent. After all, he couldn't really rush in and kill all the alchemists. The rulers of Ginza, the Silver Family and the Silver Emperor would never allow him to do so. Therefore, although they were worried that the old leader would rush in and kill people, the alchemists still contacted their subordinates and various forces that were friendly with them through communication tools. While they were collecting intelligence, they also began to look for ways to fight back. The Radiant Knights were stubborn, and they would not waste time on them, so they turned their attention to the Inquisition and Roland. As for the Inquisition, it was okay to scare ordinary people, but for them, the Inquisition was not a stubborn institution. After all, although the Pantheon is strong, there are many forces in Ginza that can check and balance it. Moreover, there are factions within the Inquisition. The Dawn faction wants to deal with them, but other factions may not. As for Roland, they did not let go of his attempt to win him over. According to the information they got, Roland himself is suspected to be a high-level spellcaster, and he is also related to Gauss, a new high-level extraordinary person in the Tower of Truth. Although it is not known what benefits the old leader gave him to make Roland stand on the side, a high-level spellcaster, even if he just stands on the side, will have a huge impact. At least, some forces that are biased towards them will choose to remain neutral because they do not want to offend a high-level spellcaster. In addition to winning over and splitting, the alchemists also used their own strength to start fighting. For example, they incited the city defense army to come down. The city defense army, which also has law enforcement power in Ginza, was instigated by them and tried to break into the workshop area and lift the blockade on the grounds of maintaining order. However, although they all have the power to enforce the law, what level are the city defense forces, and are they worthy of being compared with the Inquisition? The Inquisition hunts down heretics everywhere every day, and they are full of martial virtues. What about the city defense forces of Ginza? As the city defense forces of Ginza, they have long been rotten into waste in hundreds of years of peace. Today, the city defense forces have long been reduced to a ritual team, and the first item of selection is appearance. Therefore, when some city defense forces stupidly come to the door, they are directly beaten into pig heads by the people of the Inquisition and thrown aside. This also gives the alchemists an excuse. Although the city defense force is not an important position, it is a job in Ginza after all, and the requirements for strength are not high. Therefore, many nobles will choose to put their children into the city defense force. Among the city defense forces beaten by the Inquisition, there are many noble heirs. Therefore, the alchemists decisively followed the plan and began to spread all kinds of rumors about the tribunal. At the same time, they sent lobbyists to lobby the nobles in Ginza, trying to create an atmosphere that the tribunal was becoming more and more arrogant in Ginza, and even ignored the nobles. At the beginning, their plan went very smoothly and created this atmosphere without any obstacles. Then, when they were ready to make further efforts, they were horrified to find that they could not control the spread of rumors. They set the first fire, and where the fire would burn next and how big it would burn was not something they could control. After receiving the news of their actions, Roland chose to expand it without hesitation, adding fuel to the rumors. How could the tribunal be just arrogant? How could this be enough? Under Roland's clever fanning of the flames, the news of the rumor spread rapidly. Under the horrified face of the alchemist, the rumor quickly evolved from the Inquisition's rough treatment of the nobles' offspring to the Inquisition's preparation to judge and execute some of the nobles' offspring, and even to take ruthless action against the city defense army and the nobles who supported them behind the scenes, and to use force to resolve the open and secret struggles between the city defense army and the city defense army. The Ginza residents who spread these rumors were even able to clearly explain the grievances between the Inquisition and the city defense army, and why the Inquisition did so. It was okay for ordinary people to believe it, but what scared the alchemist the most was that there were people from the Inquisition and the city defense army who really believed these rumors. The Inquisition and the city defense army had overlapping responsibilities, and a lot of conflicts had accumulated over the years. The Inquisition thinks that the city defense army is a bunch of useless people who just wait to die. They patrol every day, but when something happens, they can't catch this noble or that extraordinary person. They are useless and can't solve anything except oppressing ordinary people. The city defense army thinks that the Inquisition is a bunch of idiots, stubborn. No matter what happens, they just know how to chop, and don't follow any rules. If they were not strong and only responsible for matters related to faith, they would have provoked people who should not be provoked and been killed. In short, people on both sides think that the other side is stupid. Therefore, under the catalysis of rumors, although there has been no bloodshed between them, the relationship between the Inquisition and the city defense army has begun to deteriorate at a visible speed. And the workshop area, the only place where the Inquisition and the city defense army have conflicts, has also become the designated place for confrontation and fighting between the Inquisition and the city defense army. So far, the Inquisition has completely pushed to the side of the Radiant Knights, and the city defense army has also stood on the side of the alchemists. However, the nominal superior of the Inquisition is only the Pantheon, and in order to avoid suspicion, the Pantheon rarely interferes in the affairs of the Inquisition. To a certain extent, the Inquisition is a relatively independent military organization. As long as it wants, it can mobilize a lot of forces. And what about the city defense army? They have too many superiors, and a big noble can point fingers at them. Moreover, the factional struggle within the city defense army is stronger and more divided. Being pushed to the alchemist side is not necessarily a good thing. Therefore, although the forces supported by the Radiant Knights and the alchemists have increased, the Radiant Knights are undoubtedly still in the lead and far ahead.